Hello, and thank you for listening to Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to informal discussion of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts.
My name is Cody.
And I'm Luke.
And for this episode, we are going to be discussing chapters 37, because I don't want to talk about chapter 36. Chapter 36, as far as I can tell, can be removed from the book entirely. But Luke, do you happen to have a summary prepared for these two chapters?
I do. Chapter 36. Neville and Nigel discuss Yashmin Halfcourt. Rumors say she is recently paired up with a gay man named Cyprian Latewood. Yashmin has lately been in the habit of skating dipping with friends at Byron's pool. She's often observed doing so by her fellow Cambridge students, including Neville and Nigel. Cut to Cyprian flashing back to a conversation he had with his father as a child, wherein his father likened his business dealings to being an army officer. Cyprian and his friend Ratty are sitting around drinking, and Cyprian admits to being in love with Yashmin despite the fact that the both of them are homosexual. The conversation devolves into gossiping about a professor who enjoys the company of horses a bit too much. Meanwhile, Yashmin meets up with three of her blonde friends, who playfully make fun of her as Neville and Nigel furtively watch. Yashmin and Cyprian share a short conversation as they walk to class. Then we return to Yashmin's friends as they dissect Cyprian as a suitor. Ratty introduces Cyprian to Professor Renfrew. Renfrew immediately clocks the vibe between Cyprian and Yashmin and adds them both to his already overflowing dossier on every human he encounters. Time slips by. Yashmin delves into the Riemann hypothesis. Neville and Nigel do more drugs, and Cyprian tries his best to escape his feelings for Yashmin. Then Yashmin reveals that she is leaving Cambridge to study in Göttingen. I don't know why I did that accent. The Grand Cohen and Yashmin discuss her impending move and how Renfrew wants to use her in his war against Werfner. Yashmin and her friends get fitted for completely silent clothing, then all of a sudden find themselves lingering at the top of a Ferris wheel. Those same friends, Cyprian and other admirers, see Yashmin off to close the chapter. Chapter 37. Dally's friend Kate sees her off. Then we finally get the long-awaited showdown between Erlis and Dally. Erlis explains how her and Merle met and reveals some details about their life together before Dally was born. Dally continually tries to focus the conversation on her mother abandoning her, but Erlis continually offers excuses. Like many matriarchs, Erlis is interested in seeing young people get together. She tries to set up Kit and Dally. Dally does not seem too opposed to this, but Kit spends most of his time slumming it in fourth class. The fact that Kit and Dally have interacted before and at a soiree thrown by a member of the Vi family, no less, seems to throw Kit off once him and Dally finally meet. The pair have a conversation during which Dally reveals that she knew Kit's brother Frank back in Colorado. Kit blames his current vibe conundrum as the reason he is not safe to be around. This only seems to further Dally's interests. We get some history on the ship that foreshadows later events in the chapter. Kit and his friend Root look around the ship and discover that it has combat capabilities. One day they go into the engine room and are pressed into service shoveling coal. Meanwhile, topside, the ship has split in two, become both warship and passenger vessel at once. Bilocated. Kit continues his role as unwilling sailor before escaping the ship once it reaches Morocco. Then Kit signs aboard a fishing vessel headed to Europe. Dally herself is back on the ship or back on the Stupendica, and she looks everywhere for Kit, even asking strangers and staff about him. And then the ship finally arrives in Venice at the end of the chapter.
Okay, thank you for that, Luke. What did we think of these two chapters?
I we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. This is going to be the first time I think in the I don't know how many episodes in the several years that we've been doing this show where I'm going to say I just did not like this chapter. It's I don't hate it. There's some decent writing in it. It's just too long. Not enough happens. I get the importance of Yashmin and Cyprian, but this is not a good way to bring them in. It's just it feels so just tacked in and unfinished and full of just bad character setup, and it really it makes me it makes me remember that I always forget that this chapter exists in a book that I really truly love as much as I do. It's just one of those moments, like if the book was your child, where you're just like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Like, you could have done better. You know better. You're capable of better. This is not that. So that being said, 37 is fantastic. I love chapter 37. There is some great writing in there. We have some great scenes that get played out, and a lot of important setup that happens in there. So I'm looking forward to talking about that part of the book.
Yeah, agreed. I think some of my extended thoughts on 36 we can just save for when we're done with our each individual recaps, because like I both have little and much to say on it. But just 36 it is very superfluous in a book that has managed to avoid superfluity up until this point, in the sense that like there has not been, sure, there's been like restating of themes every once in a while in the book to its detriment, in mine and certainly Will's understanding, but like I don't think there's been anything to this point where I've just been like, just cut it out. Like, I've never been like, why did an editor not tell him that this is completely unnecessary to do? And like, I think part of it is also just the fact that this is being reintroduced. I'm sorry, too late. Like the chapters in which Lou goes over to England and gets integrated into the society, and then we're set up with the professor, and the fact that they're keeping an eye on him, and for all of the jockeying and all of that. That was 200 some pages ago, I think, and was a small enough chunk 200 pages ago that to just it almost feels like Pynchon was trying to justify bringing it back in this late in the way that he has with other characters or other sort of story threads, and thought, okay, well, what can I do to kind of pad this out to reintegrate the characters into the landscape of this sort of part of the kind of family tree of characters this book represents. Oh, I know. I'll just give an extended discourse on homosexuality at Cambridge, which doesn't succeed and is written poorly. And, I don't even really understand what the purpose of it is, but I feel like that's maybe what Pynchon was doing. Of just like, I need to try and find a way to justify building the campus back up to remind readers of what these characters are up to. Here's what I got. But 37 is great. 37 has both effective like character writing and backstory deepening, and then also continuing to set up World War I in a way that is very, very effective. I love 37. 36, when I read this book again, I'm probably skipping the chapter. I'm not going to lie.
It's interesting too, because of and I'm not spoiling anything here, but the importance of both Cyprian and Yashmin later in the book is I can't really overexpress how important they are to the latter half of the book. But we've been introduced to Yashmin very briefly in the past, but yeah, this way of bringing her in like this and bringing Cyprian in to where he feels like a 90s sitcom character, it's just weird. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think for chapter 36 for me, I mean, I was mostly just focused on being excited that Cyprian is showing up finally. And I mean, the bar is pretty low for Pynchon depicting homosexuality already. And I mean, as bad as annoying as chapter 36 is, I mean, like, I feel like at the end of section 3 in Gravity's Rainbow, there's like a homophobic rant for like a paragraph or two to close this section, which people don't really talk about very much.
Mhm.
That's that small part of Gravity's Rainbow. People ignore it. People act like it doesn't exist. I mean, I haven't done like a deep dive on why it's in there or like anything, but it is uncomfortable to read in the modern day. And I mean, Cyprian's like he's bisexual, and you don't really see a lot of bisexual men depicted in mainstream media. And I know people maybe don't think of Pynchon as being mainstream, but like I forget who published this, but it's like Penguin Rand. Yeah, Penguin
Yeah.
Random or Penguin published this book. Like his wife's his wife used to be a prominent literary agent. Like if he's not fully establishment, he's at least somewhat establishment. And yeah, you just don't see a lot of depictions of male bisexuals. I'm not even saying that this depiction in this chapter, in chapter 36, is really any good. It's uncomfortable. The tone of everything is a little bit off in chapter 36, maybe more than a little bit off.
It's straight up confusing at times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, chapter 36 is a bit bloated, like y'all have said. It doesn't really advance the plot too much. It could have been like a 5 minute, or not a 5 minute, a 5 page like part of chapter 37 where we introduce Cyprian, and Yashmin talk a little bit. It's clear that they're like have some romantic thing, and then Yashmin leaves, or the Yashmin gets obsessed with the Ryman thing and then leaves. And that would set up a lot of stuff. And that would also kind of lead into, Dally and her family going to Europe. I feel like you could do that pretty easily. If like an editor could have told Pynchon that. Although people, the longer they publish, get less edited, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, 37. I think 37 came up. I mean, I think I made like a Lucia Tana joke at some point, maybe in Lot 40, our season on Lot 49. It might have been a different season. But I made some joke about the Lusitania like actually carrying like ammunition or like war supplies or something. For some reason, it came up on this show, and I think it was Will, or maybe it was Cody who said, or both, who said that that kind of stuff comes up in Against Today. And yeah, I mean, like y'all have already been over, 37's pretty fun. I mean, I do get a little bit annoyed with it's Kit, right? Yeah, Kit. I do get a little like guys who do this whole like, oh, I'm such a like I'm in such a dangerous position. I can't date, or like, like guys that are emotionally unavailable for really kind of nebulous reasons, kind of annoy me.
Yeah.
Because I have known men who have played that kind of stuff into, like, what I'm saying, like, it's not always real when guys do that kind of or say that kind of stuff. And I do think the kid is being a little melodramatic about not being able to date Dally because it would somehow endanger her. But other than that, it's really fun. I mean, there's a lot to like about chapter 37, and it's kind of confusing in a fun way too, where there's like some fun tangents, there's some I don't really understand how, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not I don't does the ship split in two? I don't know. We can get to that.
We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Will, what about you? What are your thoughts on the chapters?
Well, I mean, I find, as we've kind of talked about before, and I guess in case any listeners are new to this, I just dropped into the conversation, so I haven't heard what anyone else has said really. But chapter 36 I found it's more of the same in terms of the goofy academic British nonsense, which I enjoy, but it's not great. It is what it is. I do really enjoy the character of Yashmin, and I really like getting to know her better, even if it's like it feels really paint by numbers in some ways. But chapter 37 is kind of fun. It's a lot of the characters that we care the most about finally spending time together. You know, some would argue that Kit and Dally have met before, but hey, you know, it's great to actually have them like make a connection. And I you know, I do like the romance between them. I think it's actually like this is far too strong of a way to put it, but I'm gonna be brash, gonna be bold. It's a little bit like a, a redoing of the Jessica Roger romance, only insofar as like it concerns, you know, people almost consciously blinding themselves to the reality of their relationship, I guess, in order to engage in that kind of romanticization, even if obviously, you know, these two are definitely less self-serious about it, which is probably for the best, you know, as if they were people. But it's nice to entertain, and I do love the way that the prose chapter 37 really breaks down the reality. One thing I did hear was Luke referring to the ship splitting, and yeah, that's pretty awesome. I love that about this chapter, and it's one of those things where it almost feels like after, you know, you get done with all the sand stuff in the very beginnings of this third part of the book, like you're kind of, oh well, okay, we're just back to normal human level behavior. Okay, I mean it's nice, but this is a book about like airships and stuff. Where is that? And oh, here you go. Here you go.
Yeah.
It's a boat called the Stupendica that splits time down the middle. That's cool. Why not? Or whatever. I don't know if that's how I would put it, but you know.
And will later carry a man from Milwaukee to Austria, Hungary.
Indeed, yeah. But no, it's. I mean, I think there's a lot of beautiful writing in chapter 37. I wish there was more of it. I do. I genuinely wish I could like. That's one thing I felt very strongly when I read this book for the first time, and it's something I don't think is untrue in this reading. I wish this were more like 3 chapters or something, or at least 2. You know.
Yeah. And before we completely gloss over 36, it's not without its charms. I did like the Snazberry silent frock. That idea of a silent dress that operates by essentially noise canceling itself is kind of fun. And I like that part of the I'm looking through here like, what else was there that I liked? And I did not take a whole lot of notes in this chapter. It was just a lot of okay. Okay.
So I guess perhaps the best place for us to start, without just going over 36 in the way that we normally do, is just like what did we all feel about 36? To kind of borrow Will's phrasing, what do we think is important that's going on in 36 rather than sort of the minutia? To me, the biggest thing to kind of take away from this is that Cambridge is a historically gay university.
Mm-hmm.
Pynchon appears to have discovered that fact. That appears to be accurate to real history and contemporary history. I found a study from 10 years ago that did a survey of the student population of Cambridge, and they are 19% queer in some regard, whether that be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or other identities. At 19% of the campus there states that they have a non-heterosexual identity. So that's pretty large, especially because the sort of general population in England, in most sort of like surveyed areas, according to this article, was like 1.5% people would respond that way. So it is true historically and contemporarily that is a university with a very high percentage of a gay population. To me, I think the other important stuff to understand here is we've got a new character sort of joining the cast in Cyprian. We have Yasmin being revealed to be sort of a math prodigy who is particularly interested in the Riemann hypothesis and is going to go to Germany in order to study underneath some of the same kind of major German mathematicians that have been name dropped all across the book and on these sort of Riemann hypotheses, which Will, obviously, I'd love to hear from you what those things are. But yeah, just the rest of the chapter is just, it's clunky. It really feels written in a way that is almost confusing at times, where he's trying to force like a frame narrative on it that just doesn't work. Like there's an indications at some point in the chapter that like a story that is happening on the page is being recounted 15 years later, but that frame narrative doesn't actually matter to the recounting of the story at all, other than to indicate that like these two characters still know each other. And it's just it's really long for some reason. I don't know why. And I this is what I said kind of before we started recording, of just its depiction of queer people and queer identity is it's not great. It's not great. And Pynchon is not a writer who writes queer characters very much, of sort of any identity or definition. And I think that he should have just left this alone because there's nothing in here that feels real or that feels unforced when it comes to the sort of homosexual aspects of this chapter. And it's rare for me to read something that Pynchon writes and thinks, wow, this guy's like really detached from the subject matter at hand, because he's usually very sort of cued in on what he's researching, and you know, we've given him a lot of praise for that. But this reads like somebody who does not know a single gay person writing about gay people.
Yeah.
And it's one of the few cases where I feel like Pynchon shows his age and demographic. I did like the sort of aside on Professor Werfner or Renfrew, I forget which one it is, having his sort of obsessive archive of what everyone does, and that he's kind of building this like human map, so to speak. Thought that was great. If there was one thing I highlighted in the entire chapter, it was that section. But that's really it. You know, I'm looking forward to hearing more from these two characters. You guys have referenced the fact that they become very important later on. But just, it really feels like there needed to be a justification for Pynchon to spend some extra time in the university setting in order to harken back to his first visit there being so long ago in the book's page count. And this is what he stumbled upon as sort of his justification for that. And I don't think it works. Yeah, those are my feelings on 36.
I'm with you. I really am. It's so I will say to its credit, this is I would argue this is the first stumble in a book that is over 1,000 pages.
Agreed.
And it took about 500 pages to hit that stumble. So that's pretty good. And I agree with everything that you say. I will say, as far as Cyprian and Yasmin are concerned, and the portrayal of Cyprian as a queer character, it does get better. It's really, I had forgotten how bad it was here, and it is very much sitcom, like 90s sitcom writing. Like it's that bad. And I don't know the reason for it. That's what's really confusing, I think, is that with an author like Pynchon, you would expect that he would know better and know how to approach this kind of thing better. But I think your point to him showing his age and his demographic is spot on. I think this whole chapter it's 18 pages. It maybe could have been 5, maybe 6.
Absolutely.
I think if you could take the entire Cambridge section out of here and nothing is wrong with it at all. Like, not to say it's still a good chapter, but taking that out does no harm to what's here. I think that this is a rare case of Pynchon underestimating his audience and assuming that we wouldn't remember Cambridge and anything that had happened there. But that's just not the case. I think maybe a sentence or two or even a paragraph would have sufficed to, drop back in whatever clues or reminders he felt needed to be put back in there. But not this many pages. Not this much, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's just, it's sort of baffling. But it has, it is introducing a lot of things that are important later in the book. The Riemann equation, Yasmin and Cyprian, a lot of the German mathematicians and the Twit network and everything like that. That's all big stuff that comes back into play a lot more later in the book. So it is important to include it there. he fumbled doing it is what it comes down to.
I mean, Lou Basnight's not even in the chapter. And if there's like one standout character from those earlier portions that's going to like get the reader back into it, it's him. Like Lou Basnight's not in the chapter, and the twins are barely in the chapter either. They're there in the beginning, and then they also fade into the background. So like he also, in a certain way, abandons any premise of familiarity for his reader from where he does decide to spend his time.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's shocking.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's amazing that this comes this far into the book. You know, like the fact that the book has not managed to make this sort of a misstep and is covering as much fucking ground in as many different places as it is, that is also a testament to his quality. But man, was he off on the day that he composed this particular section.
So I've got some words of defense to say, I suppose. I'm not going to go to bat. But I've got something to say that I think it makes it easier for me to read, at least, although I don't disagree with really the broad strokes of the criticism going on here. Basically, to start with, I think that the reason for this chapter, to a large extent, unfortunately, is just like I think Pynchon really likes writing in that faux high class British dialect. Like all of the sentences, even if like what is said in them is almost as close to like filler as you get, it is like the exact kind of goofy zaniness that we know Pynchon loves more than any other kind of humor. So I just think that it's one of those things where whether or not what he's wrapping up in that goofy language is all that great, we should let the old man have some fun once in a while. But to a more substantial point, I think that a lot of what's going on in this chapter is getting at the same kind of innocent roots of the kind of self-indoctrination that we see at its heights in Gravity's Rainbow and like kind of post-peak in The Crying of Lot 49. I think like a lot of what's going on as far as the depictions of sexuality in general, but especially homosexuality, and especially Yashmin's homosexuality, is framed as, or not framed. It's not framed well, and that's why y'all are complaining. It's framed horribly. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's trying to get at the idea that the purpose of Cambridge, the purpose of Oxford, and the other great universities that the world modeled their education systems after, was not necessarily to like educate broadly. And anyone who's read Pynchon, that's kind of obvious and it's kind of dull. And I think that kind of goes to, I can't remember which one of you, Cody or Kate, said it, the point of not trusting the reader. I think at this point, 2006 probably could have trusted him a little bit more. But I do think that Pynchon, he's the guy who felt like he needed to bring the message home to America that, Yale was not the place that'll teach you how to be super smart. Yale's the place that'll teach you how to be a Yale man. And I think he wanted to do the same thing earlier in a more innocent and zany kind of way that is because of that disconnect that he obviously has as an older man. Almost, I don't know if it's intentional. It would be giving him probably too much credit to say it's intentional, but it almost feels like it's a commentary on like the way that the tropes of society, the memes that we have of how to categorize ourselves and one another, become like larger than life and force us into roles. And that in the context of a university system, it's such a high pressure social environment that people get forced into these molds where they come out the other end one specific way or another. And Yashmin's, she's got this weird frippery on one side that feels extremely misogynistic. That is like I think it's so it's so misogynistic that I can't help but give him credit that he's trying to be incredibly ironic there. It's just not very convincing. And that it's like, oh look, Yashmin, this is what being a young woman is in this world. Don't you want to be in this world? And no, she doesn't. So what does she do? She buries her head deeper and deeper into these single issues. What does Cyprian do when he's trying to be kind of like pigeonholed into one way of being, which I think there is something to like this turn of the century Oxbridge environment where like modern day gay stereotypes often come from that. And I think we're supposed to be giving him the grace to believe that he is commenting more on those kinds of now hyper outdated stereotypes, but they were outdated when the book came out, so it's hard to give him credit for that. But I don't know. I like on an emotional level, reading the chapter, I can relate a lot to both Cyprian and Yashmin, just not at all in the sexual realm. It is weird as hell. Anyway, beyond all of that, the Riemann hypothesis and the zeta function really getting into the substance of the book, I think is we can't just skip it entirely. Even if I like, unfortunately, I'm not an abstract geometrician. You know, if you if you really want to understand this, you're going to have to read books, and you're really going to have to be educated in proper mathematics with a capital M. And as far as like I'm concerned, the way that this book talks about the Riemann hypothesis is honestly sufficient to get the gist. I don't know. Were there any specific, later on, I guess I can answer if Luke wants to talk now, but if there are any specific questions that y'all had, I might be able to answer, or whatsoever is needed in that regard. But it's just stage setting for the time being, I think.
Yeah, my primary question would have just been like, what is it? Because I'm never going to be able to understand these things in a mathematical sense. I can barely do addition and subtraction. But like from a standpoint of its importance to the book, the questions that I had were more related to that, or the hope of what you could explain was more related to that. But if you're saying it's just stage setting and this stuff gets explored later, then I'm fine waiting for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much on these pages. It's anything that I would really bring up is more referencing back to the talking about time in the previous chapters.
Sure.
But yeah, as far as what's going on in this chapter, it's mostly like this is kind of what a mathematician might be thinking to themselves while they're working through these things. Because sure, they're doing math in their head, but doing math isn't like thinking with English. You're doing math language. And so I think this is just kind of a broad stream of consciousness kind of how Yashmin is conceptualizing her ambitions here, I guess. I don't think it's useful to try and pull it away from that immediate context to really all that much, at least.
Okay. That makes total sense.
Yeah, I mean, so as uncomfortable and weird and kind of there's some dialogue that I'm looking at right now that's just like as gently as I can, Leewood, you sodding idiot. She prefers her own sex. Gosh, then I know I'm in love with her. Like, I don't even know what the fuck that really is supposed to be talking about. That being said, I mean, as odd as it is to portray a lesbian and a gay man getting together, I do know somebody. She's older than I am, and she lives in the South. She's married to another woman, and she, I've heard her talk about how she wouldn't call herself a lesbian. It's just the woman that she ended up marrying. She just really liked her that as a person, and then grew to love that person, and then they got married. Like it's not about gender or sex or like anything. It's just the person. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, this kind of stuff. I'm not saying it happens, but there's like shades of it that happen.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, and I'm not really trying to defend it too much. I don't know. I do kind of find the pink yeah thing like kind of funny in like a really dumb college way. Like they're saying, like pinky or whatever in a very odd way. It's not like amazing. It's kind of hard to even sound out, but like making up weird nicknames for people and saying the nickname's weird is a very high school and college thing to do, I feel like. And then, I mean, Renfrew's whole, like, as Kate pointed out, Renfrew's whole map of the world thing is quite interesting as a concept. I mean, I believe that's basically that. I think it's basically just a Saint Tango reference because I think it's in the first half of the book. There's a chapter about one of the characters just sits around and drinks, and some of it's about like how much he is or is not drinking and like how much he's watering down his alcohol and all this random stuff. But a lot of that chapter is about he's just sitting there like writing down his observations about the people around him. Like he's just sitting at the window, and if somebody walks by, he'll like write down if they walk by and like speculate as to where they're going and like where they're coming from and why they're doing what they're doing and all this stuff. It's a little bit more like just the other villagers as opposed to like literally anyone in the world. But I think that's basically a Saint Tango reference. And I mean, Saint Tango, there's a little bit of Borges in that too. I feel like more than a little bit, perhaps. And it wouldn't surprise me if however you say his name, Krasnokor High had read some Borges. And Pynchon is pretty obviously read some Borges. I've already stated a lot of, pretty much anything I have to say. I do like, the ending of the chapter. It's the type of thing that I think Will might call paint by numbers, just because it's yet another like stab at like emotional depth by Pynchon to end the chapter, which he seems to be kind of doing that kind of repeatedly for on and off for the last few chapters. That being said, I do, whenever you break up with somebody or, there is always the thought of, will I see this person again? I did find it at least somewhat relatable that the ending of the chapter, this whole like wondering if I'll ever see that person again and feeling certain that I will or certain that I won't. That being said, it's not like super deep. I also find like, what's up with the West Ham reference? To the soccer club?
I don't know.
It's just
You
like,
got me on that.
like, look, there's West Ham, there's the park in Upton Lane, there's a number of lads all in claret and blue kicking something back and forth. It's like, I get that it's, like 4 short, very, very short paragraphs, but it's just like, why is this in here? I
Maybe
don't know.
Pynchon's a West Ham supporter.
Yeah, but yeah, he could have done that. If he is, then like, why is it not like a bigger part of the chapter? I don't know. But
Sure.
yeah, this chapter is just kind of on the whole unsatisfying. I didn't really like that everyone is blonde, or that all the women were blonde either. Thought that was kind of an annoying little detail, and I'm not sure what it really adds. I think there's one small thing I liked, and it was like the light coming through like the windows and like the like dormitory or the
Yes. I
whatever.
highlighted that because that was a potential of my quotes, because that was actually really good. I think it was when it was coming through like a dining hall or something.
Yeah, dining hall. Yeah. That part was good. Yeah, but yeah, the rest of it failed to impress me largely, just like y'all.
Okay. Do we have anything else that we want to add to 36 before we get into the meat of these two portions of the book?
I guess the only thing I would say, because I should have mentioned this earlier, as far as like what's the thematic depth of the Riemann hypothesis here. It's kind of it's a little bit of a shallow duality, I guess, with Renfrew's whole deal, because it is like this idea that if you can crack the zeta function, then suddenly you will understand all of numbers, as though that actually means anything, I guess. And that's kind of what's going on with Renfrew, right?
You could win math?
You don't win math, but it's like number theory is like constructed in such a way that what the Riemann hypothesis is getting at is like, if you answer it, then it's because you know what numbers are. You know where, like, what all the numbers are. I don't know how to make that sound not insane and insanely stupid, but it does have some weight.
You know what? I feel like that is an apt description in terms of the sort of ambition that these Western powers had in the early 1900s anyway.
We're going to know all the numbers.
If we can know all the numbers, if we can know all the numbers, then somehow that translates to us being able to rule the world.
Yeah, and we've got to remember that in 2006 that was the very beginning of the meme of big data, which has now turned into a surveillance apparatus that
Sure,
spans the entire
sure.
globe.
Yeah.
That is a good point.
There is some sci-fi, even going back to like the 1960s, that addresses this kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
I do just have the image in my mind now, and I love this, of a bunch of dudes in like suits, but they've all taken their jackets off and they're just kind of like strewn about the room, and they're going, "All right, guys, we got to get it now." On the board is just the word numbers, all of them, and a big question mark. Like, how do we do it, boys?
Just like a really big blackboard that goes 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, 4.
And you can
Yeah.
tell that they definitely wrote 1, 2, 3, and 4 way too big to be
Yeah.
able to fit anything
just
else on this blackboard.
Hundreds of cigarettes strewn across the table.
If we don't crack this now, we'll never be able to take the Congo.
The commies will win for sure.
Yeah, and Luke, you did mention one other thing that I don't know. I think we're also supposed to just kind of be reading like modern major general song type things into these chapters, because these are the people who led World War One, right? Not necessarily Cambridge men, but the people who were teaching the generals and the field marshals were Cambridge men or Oxford men, one of them. It's too long. It's too much.
All right. So 37 picks up back on the Stupendica. Picks up with Dally as she continues to spend time with her mother. And there is a lot of really good material in 37 that kind of fills in the dynamics of Erlis and Merle that we did not fully understand, especially as this kind of initially unfolded, that I think is written really well. Like, some of my favorite stuff comes out of this early portion of the chapter, I would say, especially before it kind of switches from the personal to the geopolitical as it does in the later half of the chapter. But in one particular line here, I loved, jumping ahead a little bit, but just an example of, like, I guess the deftness with which Pynchon is kind of portraying this situation. Comes here from 508, where it says, "He was right about that wagon." She recalled later sleeping there better than she ever had before, maybe since. The weather was still merciful enough that Merle could sleep outside in a bedroll under a waterproof up on sticks, though some nights he went into town to raise some species of hell she didn't inquire into. And he didn't come back till well after sunup. As fall started to creep in, they headed south, on down through Kentucky and into Tennessee, keeping ahead of the changing year, staying in towns she'd never heard of. Always with somebody he knew, some brother craftsman to steer him to where there was work, which might just be about anything, from running trolley cable to putting in a well. And soon as she got comfortable with the likelihood that even in hard times there would somehow be work, she could sit more quietly. Just let her worries slide away somewhere else. Pay full attention to this baby on the way. Understanding one day so clearly that, of course, it would be not just a girl, but you, Dally. I dreamed about you, night after night. I dreamed your little face, your exact face. And when you were out in the world at last, I sure did know you. You were the baby of those dreams. And I jump ahead to read that quote just because I think it's an example of, like, this is a very unconventional family dynamic, in that what Erlis essentially reveals to Dally is that your actual father, your biological father, died, and he was a drunk and kind of a cast out loser, so to speak, who couldn't take care of me, certainly wouldn't have been able to take care of you. And just as I was leaving the cemetery, Merle came up in a wagon and offered to take care of me in a way that your real father couldn't. And that there is a very complicated power dynamic at play there. There is a very complicated familial, relational, emotional dynamic at play there. And over the course of the telling of this story, through these first, 5 to 7 pages of this chapter, Pynchon kind of doesn't leave any stone unturned of that. The section I read there shows that Merle did actually take care of her, did actually take the time to constantly figure out that there was work, that Erlis was comfortable, kind of staying with him because she knew that there was going to be some sort of steady ground with which to stand on. She also doesn't deny her own feelings of like love and certainly sort of like physical lust for her now husband. And so Pynchon doesn't deny her the agency that like when she finally did learn that she could experience a different kind of love, that she went after that. So she's not, forced into one role of just being the kind of mother to Merle. She decides to take a hold of an opportunity that comes to her. And at the same time, though, it acknowledges the fact that like there was also something explicitly kind of sexual expected here, that it wasn't just a like father or mentorship role or caretaking role, that there was something else associated with that, and that was just kind of part of the kind of silent bargain that the two of them worked up together. And I think it stands in such stark contrast to what we were talking about the last chapter of like, this is a complicated dynamic that Pynchon is taking a couple pages to tell. And he's capable of doing that. And it just stands in stark contrast to the absolute mess of him kind of exploring a similar thing in the previous chapter, although it's in the bounds of queer or homosexual relations. But I think it's a really great start to the chapter, and Dally has continued to kind of grow in estimation for me as a character that I really like and care about. And this plot line of her and Merle and now Erlis and all of it has been some of my favorite stuff that's come up towards this middle section of the book. So it was great to get more detail of that, and it is truly just so well written from a perspective of exploring this kind of situation that was probably a lot more common 100 years ago than it is now. I'm sure it still happens, but certainly not in the fashion it does here, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think something that, and I know I feel like I've mentioned this before, but it really speaks to Pynchon's ability to utilize as many characters as he has in his stories. And this is a prime example. Gravity's Rainbow probably has way more, but for a writer who creates and really truly personalizes so many of these characters throughout his book, he is also very good at spacing and setting the right pace for when these characters come in and out of the story, to allow the reader to have enough time to where we start missing these characters, but we don't really fully realize we're missing them yet, is a really, really strong sign of a very good writer. Like, it's, I started this chapter and I didn't realize that we had not seen either of these characters in quite a while, but I was immediately just reconnected with them. I hadn't forgotten anything about them. I still remember everything that we had, read about them before. And now they're just gaining a new level of depth in this chapter. And it's, we're going to have a pause from some of the other characters, and we're going to come back to them. Like the pacing that he does with the character work is so good. And I don't feel like that's really ever brought up too terribly much, especially with a lot of authors, but especially with Pynchon.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of, and I'm gonna saw on the old horse again. I feel like it's a kind of a there's something to be said for the fact that Erlis is telling Dally a story that she's probably rehearsed 1,000 times. And I don't mean that she's lying, obviously. That would be a weird way to, to go about it. But I mean, like, she's a middle-aged woman who's had a lot of time to think about this, is what I mean. She's told herself this story many times, so she has all the layers of nuance in her mind. She's filled them out over the years, because it's just kind of what you do, right? You tell yourself that you did the right thing, or you tell yourself how you won't do the wrong thing again, and this is the culmination of all of that. Whereas with Yashmin and Cyprian, you're both talking about people who are in their early 20s at the oldest, who are trying to figure out their place in a world that is very hostile to them, and they haven't had 20, or not 20, but how old is Dally? 17 years old, 18,
Something like that. Yeah. Late teens.
yeah. She hasn't had Yashmin and Cyprian haven't had 15 plus years to really figure themselves out. And I think there's something going on there. But like you both said, it's just some of the most beautiful character work in the whole book. It's some of the most beautiful character work in Pynchon's entire bibliography. And it is totally captivating because I mean, he gets you in that mindset that Dally's still struggling to get out of like, hey, this is my mom. What's she gonna tell me? What's the secret? What's the thing that's gonna make this all make sense to me? And yeah, we get a lot more explanation than we did last time we saw Erlis. But I mean, would you be satisfied with that story if you were Dally? No, that's fucking heartbreaking. Every part of it sucks. No, none of it's great except for the fact that like Merle and Erlis seem to have found some kind of like relatively happy situationship for a short time. That even that ended poorly. And hey, Luca and Erlis are happy together now, but Dally's still got to live with it, right? Like it's not a happy story, and it's beautifully done because it doesn't give you the heartbreak of that, but you totally feel that kind of anticlimax, and I love that about it.
Yeah, I think this chapter is a pretty great portrayal of, or the early part of this chapter at least, is a pretty great portrayal of like how, whenever you're family with somebody, you have a family and somebody in your family and like kind of betrays you or like irrevocably wrongs you, even if like they had their own reasons and later they apologize or later they admit, you know what I'm saying? Like it is a pretty good portrayal of how like people, just how people deal with that kind of stuff. I mean, Dally, it's believable to me that Dally both like really like wants and needs a relationship with Erlis, and yet is also seems on guard still, because I can't, like I can't imagine myself at least like being abandoned by a parent as a small child, and having to deal with the reality of like seeing that parent like 15 years later or however long. I don't is it does Dally really even have any memories of Erlis like from like before Erlis left? I kind of forget if that's portrayed or not, because I feel like she's pretty young whenever we see her at first at the Chicago World's Fair.
Yeah, I don't think she has any memories of her mom.
She doesn't. She spends a lot of the first couple of chapters of the book kind of asking Merle to kind of give her some stories and background, but she doesn't have any of her own recollections.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had some friends who had parents pass whenever they were quite young. And I know that, like that can kind of that whole like that absence from a young age can kind of create a fascination with the person who either disappeared or passed or whatever, who's absent, I guess. Yeah, I really like it. And like Erlis, she I never really disliked Erlis. I don't really know. I mean, it is pretty bad, obviously, that she abandoned Dally. But I mean, it's not like I think she knew that she could trust Merle to raise Dally, and Merle, as much as I've kind of implied that he could be the evil villain of this book, I mean, he also, is it like he seemed to have she's turned out well, I guess, like she's not she's a likable person who seems to be confidently making her way into and through the world, in a way that if she'd been raised differently or in a worse manner, I don't think she'd be as confident and kind of mature as she is. Yeah, the beginning of this chapter is really cool, and I like y'all said, it is nice that we get some more backstory on Erlis and even Merle.
Yeah, agreed. I think that she could absolutely trust Merle, and I think I think she even says it like that's why she felt comfortable leaving, and that she would, promise to come back. And I like the fact that she, in the conversation they have about this whole situation, that she doubles down on the fact that like, no, Merle's your dad. Like she catches herself in a moment and doesn't refer to him as her pa, and Erlis comes right in there and goes, no, he is. And like again, it's just I think such a Such a great example of this complicated situation that Pynchon is writing to really great effect in his characters and for the reader. Turns out, though, that Dally is also a bit smitten, and it's with Kit. Kit Travers, as you may recall, is also sailing on the Stupendica. He was given his ticket to leave the Vibe Corporation to go off to Göttingen and, according to Vibe, become like Edison. And there is some really nice writing about kind of them at first looking at each other from afar until eventually Kit decides on page 512 to kind of make his introduction and go kind of make a move on Dally. And there is a reference to the idea that perhaps they have seen one another again. Am I correct in assuming that if they have seen each other once before, that he was like the stranger at our Wilshire Vibes party that she like briefly is infatuated with and then kind of disappears? Or is it gestured at in a different way? Will, you seems to have a thought on this in your recap.
I mean, I feel like Cody's chuckle when I said that makes me think I want to pass it over to him. But I'll say,
Hey, now, come on.
Consensus would say that is Kit. I don't think it's firm, and I think there's room for recognizing that this is a book that doesn't have like real world metaphysics. So like maybe they did just fucking dream each other. That's not outside the realm of possibility. And it's also very possible that like she saw Frank and she probably did, and even if it's not mentioned, because Webb and Merle were genuinely friends and ran into each other over the years, that she ran into his other siblings before as well, even if she didn't like get his name. And I think it's also very possible that he would have seen a little red-haired girl running around in the distance, because that's the kind of thing you're gonna notice. It's not just like a person in a mining town. There's gonna be it's gonna stand out when there's an 8-year-old running the coal. So I think it's there's a lot of other explanations, but I do think that is how you're supposed to interpret their very conscious sense of recognition.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think it's not explicitly stated for the reasons that Will just kind of laid out, and I think that's the right choice. And it makes it, kind of it leaves it as a little, I don't want to say Easter egg, but a little thing to recall when we get to this part of the book.
I did like the whole Earl has happened casually to inquire, how about that young man who keeps looking at you in the dining salon? I mean, I've been on ships with female family members who, were interested in my interest in other female passengers, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And there's the whole politics of who's looking at who and who's talking to who and who's doing what at what time on the ship, when it's like a small community, and it's usually strangers. So I did just like that detail. And I mean, it like Pynchon does kind of repeatedly portray mothers in a very believable way, at least in the way that they treat their children and stuff. And like Mason and Dixon, I feel like is dedicated to his parents, I want to say, and stuff. I don't know.
Did you ever have a shipboard romance, Luke?
No, I did have a romance on an airplane, but let's not get into that right now.
All right. Okay.
Uh,
That's just such a much more interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have like a before sunrise moment on an airplane with somebody?
or is it more of like a
It wasn't-
community with Pierce and Eartha Kitt?
I don't know. It was, I mean, there wasn't, I mean, there was some talking. There wasn't much talking. There was a little bit of kissing, some cuddling, let's just say. I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you for telling.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then Luke, I wanted to ask, did you have anything else you wanted to say about kind of Kit's refusal of the call if we're looking at this in a hero's journey sentiment of their relationship, where he chooses to just like distance himself from her out of a perceived danger of kind of who he owes his existence to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Will was here for this, but at the top of the show, I did talk about how I found it like somewhat annoying. I mean, it's just I don't see why him and Dally can't date. Really, I mean, I he seems to be kind of. I mean, I get that he's running away from the Vibe Corporation, but it's not like he's kind of their like star boy. I don't see why. If anything, that would make him like kind of more attractive as a possible dating candidate. I mean, in some ways, I don't know. And it just seems a little manufactured, and maybe it's just my own annoyance with guys I've known who like manufacture emotional unavailability and like wear it as like a badge of honor. And like, there is even from my own dating experiences, there can be something kind of like obnoxiously attractive about emotionally unavailable people, depending on the person and stuff. And I have kind of outgrown that a little bit, but these are kids in college, and Dally's, like late high school, early college age. So it does scan that would be like a thing that would perhaps, I do feel like it kind of increases Dally's fascination with Kit. And I do feel like Kit could date Dally, and I don't see how that would endanger Dally. I mean, Dally seems to endanger herself sometimes, like she knows how to carry herself. It's not anything like the Reef Estrella thing, like where Reef actually does kind of, I feel like, have an argument with like he, like his job was endangering his wife. I don't see how Kit's job or personal path that he's on right now would be endangering Dally, I guess. Yeah, it is kind of, like I said, it is realistic for their ages though to be doing that kind of stuff.
It also just be like compensation for not wanting to open yourself up to a person. Like
Yeah.
people do that all the time. I'm right there with you on having an attraction to emotionally unavailable people. That was something I also struggled with for a while. They're just so dark and mysterious, Luke.
Yeah. And some of them love playing up the dark and mysterious thing too.
They
So,
do.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess to me it feels like you're kind of spot on with the making excuses thing, but I think there's a little bit of depth there in the fact that Kit is someone who, up until literally like this week, has spent the last like year in constant isolation and like feeling like everyone around him is constantly manipulating him, because most of them are. And so he's in like a hyper paranoid mindset. He's not okay. He is like
Yeah.
he's on a tunnel. He's on a boat, which is kind of a prison on the water. That like maybe he'll get a shot to escape some way somehow, and he kind of does, but like the from his perspective right there, he's like, I need to leave. I need to get out of here. I need to get out of this, the machinery that's destroying and eating my family. How do I avoid this? And so Dally shows up, and sure, he thinks she's cute, but what are you going to trust? This thing that you've been laser focused on for the last year and a half, or this girl who pops up who sure you like, and sure there's some serendipity in running into her, but like, okay, if you can make a simple excuse, why wouldn't you? I guess. And from the standpoint of like Dahlia, like she's a human. This is gonna mean something to her. Like this is the one who got away for Dally, and that means something very real, even if there's no actual romance that gets built beyond a few stolen moments, And it's I don't think those are rare. I think those are rarely well depicted, but I love them. I love them with Dahlia. I think they're kind of amazingly concisely done.
Yeah, I agree completely. Could not have said it better myself. There is sort of one last meeting between the two of them as he lapses into a daydream, which that daydream allows it to transition really well into what the latter half of this chapter is going to be and the kind of heavy hitting content of this chapter is going to be. And that is the fact that the Stupendica itself is really two boats, one a tourist sort of passenger liner, and one a battleship for the the Austro-Hungarian army navy. Sorry, and there's a couple of different ways that we could tackle this subject because that subject kind of exists for the rest of the chapter. But I guess maybe the right place to start is what is it that we make of the Stupendica, of its kind of bifurcated existence? Its perhaps bilocated existence would be the more appropriate thing to say given the section of the book we're in. But then also what that is leading to on a grander scale within the book, because obviously there is a lot of stuff in this chapter in particular that is bilocating. The location of where the Stupendica needs to go once the kind of war alert gets sent out is two locations. The boat is two locations, two boats. And it seems as though people can kind of exist on one or the other of them, but they're both in the same location in kind of a weird way. If you get into the history of the ship liner, or not the ship liner, the shipyard that built this sort of ocean liner, the companies that Pynchon makes references to are real, and the history of them that he kind of gives out is also real. That this particular individual who started the shipyard originally did one kind of work and then did a lot of insurance work for the ships that they created out of there, and then eventually became the central sort of hub for the Austro-Hungarian Navy to build its battleships and its warships. The city of Trieste is also an interesting city to choose for this section of where it's built. It is accurate to where these companies are located, but also it is a city that changes hands a lot over the course of this kind of early 1900s history with the world wars. And I think it gets to maybe a broader point that I was kind of developing, and maybe this is a conspiracy corner thing. It's a real short one. Cue the music.
Электромузыкальный инструмент терминвокс – это первый инструмент такого типа.
But what it gets to, I think, is potentially this idea that like colonialism and the building of a colony or the expanding of territory from one of these great Western powers does effectively create two countries within one landmass. And one is where the sort of native or indigenous or long-standing people there live with their culture. And the other is the culture of the colonizer being built on top of them, to where they're both, Angola or Morocco or the Congo or whatever, but the way in which that country is now layered has two very, very distinct layers between the colonizer and the colonized. And now this is where I guess the conspiracy corner idea kind of zooms out a little bit, in that World War I, as I'll come to expand upon later, really wiped away all of that. Like it was the last time that was kind of done in this style and in this way. And the war was so destructive in the way that it changed the great powers and tore up a lot of these treaties and alliances, really led to this earlier colonial period as we kind of understand classical colonialism to go away. It didn't go away completely, of course, but there was a big shift at that point in history. And it feels like some of that is what he's commenting on here, with the way that the ships are repurposed from passenger liner to war vessel, which certainly also just is a reflection of real life history. But I wanted to open that up to you guys too, as far as what do you think is going on with the Stupendica? What is Pynchon trying to say? How is this leading to some of his broader thematic writing?
I think this is where it's time to gesture back to the whole Renfrew idea of geopolitics, right? And it kind of forms, I don't know, kind of the flip side of what I think what I gather you were saying there, Kate. Just because I don't want to assume I fully understand everything you were implying.
Sure.
But it is almost like, in a way, the the separation between the colonized and the colonizer has been transposed into a separation between classes, at least on the ship, right? And it's not one to one. There's help on the tourism boat, and there are people like Kit on the military cruiser, but these are, I don't know, it's almost like, in a way, in a very like poetic way, that I thought I struggle to view it as like any real explanation, but it's as though Kit is embracing the mathematical mindedness of the era. He is saying, I'm going to retreat from Dali entirely. I'm going to retreat bourgeois life, and I'm going to be a worker. But his work is going to be hiding and doing vector analysis, which is it. I mean, it is work. It's just very, very skewed from how we normally think about these things. But it is almost like this kind of this reinstantiation of like the division within Kit, but through the boat itself. Because like, yeah, there's the colonization angle, especially into the Strait of Gibraltar is where the split happens, so something is going on there, and it's almost getting at the way that not only is, especially today, it was just beginning in 1907, 1911, whenever this was particularly set, but especially today, when it comes to like colonization as it exists, tourism is an incredibly powerful weapon against minority cultures, right? It destroys societies, and it decimates cultures. And in this way, like, Kit is aware of what he is being. He is on this boat that is doing this thing. It is doing this military function, and at the same time, it is him hiding from the human element so that he can feel justified in his isolation, I guess.
I think all of that's in there. I agree with everything that y'all have said. I think in a more, if you take it, it's still a metaphor, but in a more literal sense, I do think it's a reference to conspiracy theories related to the SS Lusitania, which, you know, the official, correct me if I'm wrong, and I very well could be wrong because I forgot to research this, but off the top of my head, Lusitania, like the official, you know, story on it is it was just a civilian ship going from the USA to, you know, Europe. I'm probably England, and it was sunk, you know, by Germany, I believe. And there are people like, you know, there's Lusitania truthers. Basically, I've seen people make threads about it and comments about it on our conspiracy on the subreddit conspiracy, which I actually haven't been on in a long time, for pretty obvious reasons.
Yeah.
You know, just because
So,
don't get me started on
Axolotl isn't your best friend.
Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to like experience like the most bigoted part of the internet, I'd go to r/conspiracy. But anyway, that conspiracy still exists. People still talk about that some. I mean, and you know, America's entrance or reason for starting or entering wars in the 20th and 21st century, and even in the late 1800s with the USS Maine and Cuba and stuff. It's a lot of convenient stuff happens, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, don't get me fucking started on the Gulf of Tonkin and stuff. Like, you know, like there's at least, I'm not saying like every time we entered a war it was for false fabricated, you know, like false flag type stuff. But I mean, just like, you know, like at least once or twice have we self-sabotaged and then entered a war. I would say, I'm not going to be specific about which ones I think we did that with, but you know, I don't know. That's all in there. I think just, you know, like, because it's a passenger ship, and then it's also, you know, like Lusitania obviously wasn't a battleship inside of it, but it could, like, like, who knows? Like, it could have been carrying like munitions, could have been carrying, like parts for airplanes or tanks or guns, even just, like troops, I don't know. I mean, that's all in there, I think.
Yeah, the Lusitania. I mean, there is some additional thematic relevance, especially to the bilocation idea, because it was actually built in tandem with another ship that is referenced here. It's the Mauretania. The Mauretania would later be retrofitted as a hospital and munitions ship after World War I started and after the U.S. entered it. So even within kind of what Pynchon is commenting on in real history, that there were like technically two ships. And if you're accepting the official sort of telling of events, which I personally am, only because it really didn't seem like the U.S. wanted to enter World War I, but I'm also not an amazing historian on World War I. I'm getting there slowly as this book is continuing to be read. But you would have one that is a passenger ship that is sunk, and then you have one that is turned into a warship once the war starts, or at least a military vessel to a certain degree. So there is some additional sort of real life resonance for what Pynchon's exploring here.
I can't really add anything to what you guys said because I agree with all of that. The only thing I will say, and I apologize if this is something that got brought up and I just lost it in everything going on. And the Pynchon wiki didn't mention this, which I thought was interesting, but the name Emperor Maximilian is reference to, let me get his name right here, Fernando Maximiliano Jose Maria de Habsburgo Lorena, who was actually a Austrian-born emperor of the Mexican Empire who was the younger brother of Franz Ferdinand.
Ah. Can you say his name one more time?
No.
Oh.
No, sorry. He was not Franz Ferdinand, Franz Joseph, the king of Hungary prior to Franz Ferdinand. But it is Fernando Maximiliano Jose Maria de Habsburgo Lorena.
Of Mexico.
Of Mexico. Otherwise known as Maximilian I, the first.
Man, you remember when Franz Ferdinand was in this book?
Yeah.
How long ago that was at this point? That's good information. I neglected to research that, but I remember thinking that it was weird that there was no line about that in the Pynchon wiki.
Yeah, that is strange, but I think we all know our feelings on the Pynchon wiki for this book.
All right. So, as the ship turns from the Stupendica into the Emperor Maximilian, Hit and Root find themselves kind of trapped in the lower decks, where all of the different members of the Austro-Hungarian Navy are hard at work. One of whom is an American stoker named OIC Bodine, who lounged against a bulkhead drinking some horrible fermented potato mash as prelude to going off watch and into sleep. Do we have any thoughts on Bodine? Obviously, one of the favorite sort of pastimes of the Pynchon wiki is creating family trees.
Mm-hmm.
What do we think about OIC Bodine?
Well, I for one like that he's like I don't know. It's weird. It's like you finally see him see the Bodine where he's meant to be, in the guts of a ship, restrained from any of his proclivities,
blasted out of his mind on homemade alcohol.
Yep. Yeah. Drunk and just barely functioning, but doing his job.
He is truly a Freddy Quell from the Master in that regard.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I feel like there's something to the OIC that there's more than the officer in charge or whatever military acronym that may be. Pynchon wiki is wildly all over the place about that, including a breed of dog that Jack London raised, and just literally saying, "Oh, I see." So I don't know.
Could you say that more sarcastically?
Well, I had to inflect it somehow, right?
Well, just to correct it, breed of hog. So at
Is
least
it
is pig.
Oh, it is hog. I'm misreading it as dog. Yeah, it is hog. You're right.
So there's a logic there. It's a little bit more I don't know. Fender Belly's so much more fun, but
Yeah.
Yes, agreed.
it is extremely like high modern to have someone named after the initials of a breed of pig. Like that feels like a Flannery? Yeah, Flann O'Brien. That's what I'm thinking of. It's like a Flann O'Brien character almost.
Sure. Yeah. This leads to, and the alarm bell's going off. Does someone want to read the paragraph on 517, starting with all of a sudden?
All of a sudden, it was like the entire black gang was having a violent paroxysm. The telegraph from the bridge started tolling like all the cathedrals of hell on a particularly important feast day. Cruising turbines were lit off, oil and steam pressures began to rise. The Oberhauptdietzer, having produced from somewhere a Mannlicher 8-shot pistol, brandished it at the steam pressure gauges in high irritation, as if to shoot them if they did not provide the correct readings. Cries of "Dampfmittel" heard from several directions. Kit looked around for the nearest ladder to the open air, but all had become many-tongued confusion. He found his head seized by a gigantic bituminous hand, which propelled him rapidly through the fierce spasms of light and the ungodly steel clangor towards the bunkers at the side of the ship, out of which men were loading coal onto skids to be dragged to boiler furnaces.
So just I really love a lot of the writing in this section with how the ship kind of reveals itself to be something else. Like all of the different sort of waiters or catering workers taking their uniforms off, and they've been wearing these like naval jumpsuits the entire time, and like getting to see the way that Pynchon writes about naval vessels in particular. I love. It's very clear that he was in the Navy from the way that he discusses the machines of those boats and how they really operate sort of as an almost like cyborg between the human beings that kind of populate it and the actual work that they're doing with the mechanical portions of the ship. Like it's some of my favorite stuff that Pynchon does, and it's really really well rendered here. But I really loved that quote in particular of like everyone coming to an alert and getting sort of ready for battle stations. It's not a jarring change, but it's a sudden one, and it's one that I think really effectively adjusts the reader's kind of expectation of what is to come, or kind of the experience that they're about to have as it moves from the personal to the kind of multinational, I guess is the way that I'll put it, before it closes out to the chapter in a personal way again.
Yeah, I mean, I keep bringing this book up for some unbeknownst to me reason, but it's very much like Moby Dick in that way. It's something that Pynchon shares with Melville in that like so many books that are set on naval vessels or feature naval vessels, they do like weird romantic shit. They talk about, if it's the Age of Sail, there's a lot of like weird geometric nonsense. Or you're talking about like the way the prow crests over the waves or whatever. You're talking about these big picture ideas that are just like pretty and they're almost like descriptions of paintings. And what Pynchon does and what Melville does and what I imagine most other writers who are actually sailors do really well is like depict the actual like the human interface, the way that you are on the ship, not simply like what is the ship, what's it doing, what's the majesty of this vessel. No, you're getting nitty gritty. And like Melville in Moby Dick, when like they see a whale, when everything snaps into action, people's personalities dissolve and everyone is part of the same thing, the ship, and it's awesome. And
Yeah.
I like the way you put it with the cyborgification.
Hive mind.
Hive mind indeed.
I do think it is important. I mean, y'all have already pointed out that Pynchon served in the Navy. I do think it's important to remember that Pynchon, at least from what I can gather, was on a destroyer that was called to the called to Egypt, called to the Eastern Mediterranean Sea because of a crisis in the Middle East. And I'm sure that, I don't know, from what I've never been in the military. Obviously, I mean, I've been around veterans some just because of where I lived in Colorado Springs, where there's a lot of military bases and a lot of ex-military people will settle there once they're done with the military, and it's just a very kind of, there's a lot of military industrial complex stuff going on there. And I'm in my grad school. There were a few different veterans, partially because Tim O'Brien taught there, and Tim O'Brien, obviously became famous for writing about the veteran experience. And I don't, you know, I don't want to talk. I don't want to like say this like I'm an expert. I guess I'm like I said, I've never been in the military, but I do imagine that people do change once shit hits the fan. I'm sure that like there are more than a few like officers in the military who, whenever like the U.S. or whatever military, whatever country wasn't at war with anybody, that there's probably a lot of kind of like there's a like there's a reason that like there's a thing called military humor, and it's not just because of like dealing with trauma through humor. It's also just there. I don't know. I don't want to be like the U.S. military is so goofy and fun to be in or anything. Like I don't, or it's like fun to be a soldier, or I don't know where I'm going with that. But I don't. I think you know what I'm saying. Where like people will like if a squadron if the squad has like somebody who's like a prankster or like somebody who makes jokes a lot, that person is probably not going to be doing pranks and making jokes while bullets are flying. They're gonna have to be serious, and I do think that some of that is probably in there. And I do think Pynchon didn't experience warfare directly, but I do assume that he had some carefree days while at sea at some point in his Navy career, and he also had some stressful days at sea. And I'm sure that the people around him were acting differently whenever it was more carefree and just kind of hanging out at sea than whenever it's possible they're going to be shot at or shelled or whatever was going on in the Suez crisis that Pynchon was on a ship that was involved in. Yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. I don't know. Like it's just the specific parts about like y'all pointed out, like the catering people suddenly changing from like doing everything the guests tell them to ordering around the guests, and that kind of like flip of a coin thing, I'm sure is an aspect of being in the military, or can be for if going from not at war to at war, like everything's going to change, or from non-emergency to emergency, people are going to act different, that kind of stuff.
Sure, that makes sense. On 518, this is where my pace of reading dropped sharply. On 518, we get a line here that says, the receiver and the ship's Marconi room were picking up traffic from somewhere else, not quite in the world, more like a continuum lateral to it. Around mid-afternoon, the Stupendica had received a message in cipher to the effect that British and German battle groups were engaged off their Moroccan coast, and that a state of general European war should be presumed in effect. A couple of pages later, which we get to as the Stupendica gets closer to its target, we hear, although the first port of call had been advertised as Tangier at the moment, according to the scuttlebutt, under the control of local warlord Mulai Ahmed Rasuli, the captain had decided instead to put in far to the south at Agadir, Queen of the Iron Coast. This set of quotes, first the kind of warning about something happening in Morocco, and then the specific citation of two cities in Morocco, is another case of A, interesting bifurcation of it being one call that leads to two cities. But also, it's important that the first quote I read kind of indicates that the message comes outside of the world, like it's coming from a place a little bit otherworldly, in that the two cities and the two incidents that happened in the cities in real life happened years apart. And so even within that, Pynchon is playing with time and how these two kind of parallel realities that we've talked about a little bit over the course of this book are in conflict with one another here, or where they're getting their information from is coming from a space in between them, or something like that. Again, it's a lot more interesting doubling stuff that goes through this whole chapter, especially after they get on the Stupendica, and the Stupendica reveals what it really is. For the historical sort of context to this, it is a reference to the first and second Moroccan crises that formed a lot of the causes of World War I really close to when the war actually was going to start. The second crisis happens in 1911. The first crisis is known as the Tangier Crisis, and that ran between March 31st of 1905 to April 7th of 1905, or of 1906, rather, sorry. At this point in history, the tensions between the Triple Alliance, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and the Triple Entente, which was France, England and Ireland, and Russia, were very high. This crisis would only seek to deepen the division between those two alliances and push Europe more broadly towards a point of almost resignation that war was kind of imminent. So on March 31st, Kaiser Wilhelm visited Morocco, and he gave a statement of support for the sovereignty of the Sultan, which was a direct provocation against France. France was effectively a controlling interest in Morocco. Morocco wasn't a colony. It wasn't a full extension of France's power, but they did basically control all the political decisions that the Sultan made and had kind of a vested interest in the country's existence, but wasn't calling the country a colony in a traditional sense. In a way, what France was doing with Morocco is more akin to like what America and Israel have with one another, or a couple of other examples of like soft colonial power, where we really dictate the direction of another country, but we're not claiming a sovereignty or ownership over that country. This sort of visit by the Kaiser and this sort of subsequent vote of confidence causes the Sultan to reconsider these ties to France, and he calls for a conference to be held where the great sort of Western powers can come and give him advice on governmental reforms. And for the first time, that doesn't include France. And so, in addition to that, it leads the Sultan to reject some governmental reforms that France had put forth. And all of that leads to a lot of posturing that I'm not going to kind of go over, similar to the difficulty in trying to kind of go through all of the Serbian history that we talked about earlier in the book. The posturing is dumb. It's a lot of people shouting at one another. It's a lot of people like playing games, both in the media and in the political circus. But essentially, all this posturing leads to something known as the Alga-Creus Conference. I have no clue how that city or place is pronounced, but this conference was created as a sort of set intention to resolve the conflict between France and Germany in Morocco. France was again sort of utilizing a soft power to essentially create a colony. Germany, who was on the other side of these alliances to France, had claimed to have some sort of vested economic interest in Morocco. And so therefore they, because this is just how the great powers operated at the time, felt a need to have a hand in how the country was operating. It wasn't just enough to have some economic interests in a place. You also had to control their leaders as well. And so they wanted to settle that sort of dispute. And Germany had hoped that they would be able to come out of it with more influence over Morocco and the Sultan. But by the time all of the negotiations and the kind of communication at the conference ended, Germany only had one supporter out of the 13 nations that were assembled, and it was Austria-Hungary. So they really were not able to get anything that they wanted out of this conference, and it was a massive, massive sort of political defeat to Germany as a result. Ultimately, all the crisis did, this sort of political posturing and jockeying over the country, was worsen relations between these great Western powers. Interestingly enough, though, it was also seen as the precursor to the Russian government entering into the Triple Entente. Prior to this happening, it was just England and France. Now Russia wanted to join it, and when Russia joins it, and it goes from the Double Entente to the Triple Entente, you end up with sort of this end of the Great Game, which, if you remember from a long time ago, when we were discussing like the Russo-Japanese War and the Ottoman Empire, the Great Game was this kind of battle over pushing back Russian influence and Russian expansion. Now one of the great Western powers is entering into a treaty with Russia, that day is kind of seen as over. On top of that, there was also the Pact of Cartagena that was written and signed. The Pact of Cartagena brought Spain not in a direct alliance with the Triple Entente, but in essentially a supporting cast role to the Triple Entente. Because if Germany got some influence in the Mediterranean and in Northern Africa, Spain was worried that their interests in the region were going to be disrupted. And so they understood they didn't have enough power to kind of create their own alliance or be much of a supporting character to these main alliances, but they would just prefer kind of things stay the same, that the status quo be maintained. And so they effectively throw their support in the Triple Entente's direction. Crucially as well, the reason why Russia got involved with the official sort of alliance and the pact between these nations was because of the construction of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, which of course we have already talked about earlier. Through all of the Russo-Japanese War and through all of the kind of realignments with the Ottoman Empire and the Serbian countries that used to kind of form the outer edge of the Ottoman Empire, after all that kind of settled, Germany and the Ottomans and Austria-Hungary kind of started to find themselves boxed in and losing ground to this other sort of alliance of nations. And the Berlin-Baghdad Railway was supposed to be a way for them rather to kind of climb out of that. Now, unfortunately, they would not. World War I would eventually happen, but the kind of completion of their status as a boxed-in sort of world power would come with the second crisis, which is known as the Agadir Incident. That spanned from July to November of 1911. So 4 to 5 years later from when all of the events of this prior crisis had wrapped up. And what we have happening here is essentially that after the conference ended, France basically assumed political control of Morocco. So Germany gains nothing. But as part of their pact, France says, if you have economic interests in the country, those won't be threatened. Any political treaties that we want the Sultan to sign, any sort of laws that are going to come in terms of how Morocco can deal with outside nations who have a controlling interest in their government, are also going to have to take care of German interests when we weigh whether or not the Sultan and Morocco can put forward those laws or sign those treaties or create those reforms. But in 1911, France would force the Sultan to sign a treaty that would bar him from signing any other treaties without French approval. This was seen as acting in direct opposition to the agreement from the conference after the first crisis. And so that allowed Germany to kind of stir up some trouble in Morocco, for lack of a better term. And a revolt, a full-scale revolt, broke out against the Sultan because this effectively was starting to turn something that was a symbolic control or a implied control into a hard control. Where now it wasn't just, France would like to take a look at those laws you're thinking about passing. And instead is, you cannot pass those laws without our approval. And so a lot of unrest starts to happen. A lot of rioting, general revolt, and kind of rebellion is starting to break out across the country. And France forces the Sultan to ask for their military assistance. That is how it is always written in the history books. So he is put in a position where he has to make a formal declaration of request for France, but he really doesn't have a choice. France is going to come down there regardless. So he makes the request, and some French troops show up. Germany, in response, and this is key to what we learn about in a couple of pages here in the book, claims that the rebellious nature of the rioting and of the revolt that's taking place, that it has a direct threat to German economic interests, and in particular, these towns of German folks in the country. Modern historians understand that is also false. That is as false of a claim to go down there with their naval vessels that they'll send down there as it is for the French to claim that their assistance was asked for rather than sort of forced or incited. The sort of German economic interests that they had were just these crappy little towns, and the ranches and kind of, I guess, industry that was associated with them. There were not many of them. It was not worth particularly a whole lot of money. And it was also very far away from where any of the rioting and unrest was happening. So there was truly no threat to it. It is, as Pynchon says, effectively just a smokescreen to justify saying you have an interest in the country in this greater sort of political posturing that's going on between the great powers. And so Germany sends some warships down there. One, it starts with just a gunboat, and then like an actual battleship and a cruiser and a destroyer show up. And no one's shooting at each other, but all of these militaries are now congregating there, which is pushing something that was prior sort of a proxy war, mainly through third world countries and, different usages of the private sector through exploration or through construction, is now becoming a bit hotter. There's militaries involved in how this stuff is beginning to unfold. And this ends up crashing the German economy, their choice to do this, because Germany's in a pretty weak position. It got stuck with the Ottoman Empire when previously, as I talked about on a long ago episode, was sort of using the Ottoman Empire as a proxy nation, and so were the other Western powers. Sort of that was one side of a proxy battle as the Ottoman Empire began to be seen as the kind of old man or the old power. So Germany's in a pretty bad position already. Now it's going to lose grip on another nation that it wanted to really gain control of, and it is escalating a conflict. What this does causes a lot of unrest in the markets. The stock market in Germany at the time dropped 30 points, which nowadays sounds like nothing. But back then, that's a significant amount of business that would be being done of a much smaller stock market in comparison to what we have now. And a run on the bank starts, where people start pulling their paper money out and exchanging it for gold, because these are all still gold-backed standards of currency. And it's so bad that apparently the National Reich Bank lost a fifth of its gold reserves in 1 month just from this run on the bank. And so at this point, the Kaiser realizes this was a horrible idea. If I keep this up, it may really cause an economic crisis worse than this. And so he decides to leave. And in that moment, Germany not only blinked in the staring contest, but they poked themselves in the eye to get out of the contest. And so France takes this as an opportunity to basically renegotiate terms, and they go, hey man, nope, Morocco is ours. It is officially becoming a protectorate. End of story. And so negotiations continue in this new conference, and what it does is it leads to, as I've mentioned, full control of Morocco for the French. But in exchange, they cede territory to Germany from their colony in the Middle Congo. That territory would later then be incorporated into a German colony, and it would give, that was already existent, and would give Germany an outlet to the Congo River. And then in exchange for that, Germany gave France a piece of what is now Chad. So another one of these colonies that they had. So an exchange of territory happens there. The second crisis, in terms of a sort of modern political lens and a modern historical lens being applied to it, is really one of the last major kind of signposts before World War II happens. After this occurs, as I kind of already sort of foreshadowed a little bit ago, there was a sort of resignedness that was built in the major European powers, where they just said to themselves, well, a war is happening. I guess we should be prepared for that. And that it was sort of considered non-avoidable at that point, that there was nothing anyone was going to be able to do. These treaties were too deeply allied, and war was going to be the only thing that really sorted that out. And it's truly because this exchange of territory, while technically giving Germany an advantage, with the loss of Morocco, as I kind of already mentioned, really boxes in the Triple Alliance. They have nowhere to go, and they have this vestigial organ in the Ottoman Empire that they've been forced into a caretaker role for, completely ruining a lot of the plans that they had in place long term, in terms of kind of creating a grander control over the continent in the sort of chess match that's going on right now historically. And even worse is they're having to carry the Ottoman Empire But if we remember, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration was staffed by people from all the great Western powers, and they're going in there carving up the country economically. So not only are they forced into supporting the Ottoman Empire, but a lot of the money from taxes that is being pulled out of that country is also directly funding their enemies. So they are in a terrible position. And I guess this is where we should go back to Kate's conspiracy corner. And maybe this isn't so much of a conspiracy corner as it is just a thought on what Pynchon is kind of responding to here, in terms of especially how this book fits into the broader canon of his work and his project that he's exploring that we've talked about a couple different times. And I'm sorry that I've already probably been talking for like 10 minutes, and I'm probably about to talk for another 10 minutes. But
it's all good. I love this.
I had a thought when I was talking about this with my partner that, like, we talk about World War I in class in America. We don't have the same view of it, certainly, as they do in Europe, where it is, especially for England, almost considered on the same level of importance to their kind of culture and historical identity as World War II and the work they did there. So we learn about it. And we never learn really the kind of history behind why it happened. We're told, or at least, I was anyway, about Franz Ferdinand's killing that starts World War I. And I had a teacher that said that line basically. And then he said, now, in reality, of course, like, that wasn't enough to ignite this like global conflict. What really happened, and the best that I can do to simplify it is, he got killed, and then because of treaties that were already in place, one person said, hey, don't you beat up my friend, and then another person said, hey, don't you beat up my friend, and then a shouting match occurs between all of these different countries where escalatingly, because of treaties being in place, all of these different nations are all shouting, stop beating up my friend, until they're all beating up each other into one giant sort of dog pile, is how he described it. And that has certainly borne out to be true with the amount of research that I have done now. But what is really interesting to me about World War I at this point, and I can't claim to be a scholar on it, I can't claim to fully understand it, everything that I have presented on this show is my understanding of it from the historical research that I am able to do. But it does feel like what World War I really did, and why I think the book that Pynchon wrote that is the longest about the death of sort of the age of magic and about the last gasps of the old world being destroyed by private interests and capital to create the capital T they and the military industrial complex, and all of the stuff that he would go on in all of his career to explore the effects of on the individual mostly, but also institutionally, is that World War I destroyed what was left of the old world. That, like, colonialism in this way of controlling governments, controlling countries, building colonies that spoke a different language in these other countries is kind of not done anymore. Like the Agatha Christie sort of Death on the Nile society of like these famous luxury hotels that are owned from European countries and take you on these European cruises to visit these sites that are being preserved for the purpose of enjoyment by the 1% and by the couple of people in these countries that are the colonizers to enjoy in a trip to the as they would call it, the Orient, to view the colonized, right? Like that isn't done anymore. We do nation building. That's still a thing. And we do certainly do, other methods to control governments and change outcomes of elections and all the rest. That still happens. But this like old style idea of what we view as a colony and as a traditional colonialism kind of ends after World War I. Not entirely. It still goes on even in that sort of phase. But for it to be like the primary fixation of most of the first world countries kind of stops after this. And it's because I think a lot of these first world countries realized that it forced them into these alliances and these grander sort of schemes of doing politics, often associated with a monarchy, that just doesn't work anymore when you can have a conflict like World War I show up that decimates everything because of where technology is at. That just that style of political sort of machination and in political control just doesn't function when Gatling guns are a thing and battleships and fast transportation, right? And that it is so decimating World War I that there was kind of nothing to take its place. But what was there to take its place was the industries of war that had first been built up to help these countries posture and then eventually was deployed on the battlefields in World War I. And that the requirement out of that conflict to fight that many nations that are against you, but then also on that many fronts involving that many people, necessitated a conversion from the universities, from the sciences, from the manufacturers, from everyone to start creating weapons of mass warfare. And so all that's left after all of this stuff is decimated, after we've conclusively proven that this old system doesn't work, is the means with which to continue fighting and prosecuting what the new system can be. And that there are multiple layers of bilocations to that. There is already the one that I've talked about, that like the old colonial project does this thing where it creates two identities in one state or one country between the colonized and the colonizer. That's one bilocation. The book itself is also sort of bilocated into this grander narrative of the lead up to World War I and all of the cultural, political, and societal things that fed into that conflict being possible. And then also the sort of anarchist, trade unionist rise of capitalism and the fight against the rise of capitalism. And so you're exploring these two different narratives that become pretty historically important because it is an anarchist that will eventually kill Franz Ferdinand, setting the other timeline off. And that these two universes that couldn't be more different, the political, the giant machine that is churning to create a war at its sort of terminal point, and the world of the actual sort of like lower class, working class folks who are never even going to see the supposed benefits of that colonial project, come into contact with one another in this moment in which an anarchist kills Franz Ferdinand. And both of those worlds are destroyed in a way that causes them to collapse into one another, where they can't run parallel anymore. And because of the way in which wars are fought from World War I to World War II, that if the anarchists and if the trade unionists and the people pushing for a revolution were going to take control of these nations after they were destroyed and try and build something better in the first place, that was never going to happen when they were conscripted to fight in the war. And so that world is gone too. That world has a very little chance of pushing any forward because most of them die in the war that was set off by one of their own killing the wrong guy, or killing the right guy for him, but the wrong guy for sort of history. And so what are you left with? Well, you're left with these industries. You're left with the sort of burgeoning capital T they and the weapons and the military industrial complex. And you're left with capitalism that can afford to pay for all of those things. And so that starts to pave the way forward. And out of that, you get a bunch of disaffected people who fought a war for no reason, for people who they never met, for people who were jockeying for power in pointless ways that never benefited them and that they never even saw anything out of. And they get disaffected because they realize that the war was pointless and that there's certainly no relief coming for them. And you end up with Mussolini creating fascism. And that starts this engine over as the new kind of political idea initially coming out of Italy and then expanding to create the environment where those industries, as analyzed through Gravity's Rainbow, begin to create sort of reality and logic breaking weapons that further bury the old world for all of its good points and bad and continue us down the road that we're going to be stuck on. And if the old world of magic and reason and the Enlightenment and all of that is the day, so to speak, then all of this stuff leading up to World War I, and especially the kind of destruction of these bifurcated realities and subsequently bifurcated storylines in the book, is all running against the day. That's a lot. I'm sorry I talked for so long, but that's really what I got out of just reading this, where like I've mentioned that a lot of this history is pointless. It's stupid. It's men acting in ways that are irrational when we can look at them from a removed sort of what we call more enlightened lens in the modern era. And that World War II, there was no reason for it to ever happen. And it really does represent the first kind of step in this, like, we're not doing things for reasons anymore. We're doing them for money and capital and power. All of that is true. But like these two crises are so stupid and it's so close to the war actually starting that it really tipped me over into like a whole like mind fuck that I just had to sit and deal with on the couch for like 15 minutes. But that's where I'm at after this one quote on page 518 and another on 520.
I was when you put in the chat that you had fallen into this sort of rabbit hole. I was very eager to hear what you had come up with, and I was not disappointed. That was an incredible connection that I had not previously had ever even crossed my mind. And I think that adds so much context to what's going on, both historically and within the plot of the novel itself. And I'm still like processing all of that, but that is like it's that kind of historical connection that really makes me wonder why less people have read this book than they have Gravity's Rainbow. Not to diminish anything Gravity's Rainbow has done, but I think he took everything that he learned about writing and historical research and how to incorporate that historicity into the narrative of a story in a condensed and distilled enough way to make it feel natural, but still provide all of that context for the reader who's willing to go like you and do that extra work to get that context. And it makes it so much more rewarding when you have that, and then you can revisit that part of the story that on your subsequent rereads and have that sitting in the back of your mind, and it just builds that foundation for everything else that's happened before and everything that's, you know, moving through the pipeline as the story goes. And that's such a critical thing to have, especially for a book this dense and this complex. So as always, when you have these incredibly deep dive research moments, I can only say thank you for doing that work, because it adds so much to my understanding of this book.
I'm going to second Cody's thanks. And I would like to add on to what you said, and it's not an addition in substance, but I think it might be illustrative for some listeners who may struggle with paying attention to long sentences, or, you know, just like this is how their brain works more. The Stupendica in that scenario, the Stupendica and the Emperor Maximilian are functioning as the capital and the world itself, right? They are the thing that is turning on a dime because it's the only thing that can be used for both purposes. And so it is the world itself. It is the planet being turned from this place where the maps are, you know, pleasantries, essentially. The border boundary lines are agreed by gentlemen shaking hands, to things guarded by demilitarized zones, because that's all that you have left after that kind of destruction that you outlined so clearly is the machinery to make more machines, and the machinery to function, to keep going, not necessarily to build anew because you have too much of a hangover from the war, I guess. But thank you for fleshing out all of the details of the history, because otherwise I would have just been gesturing wildly.
I appreciate your kind of addendum there. I think that's helpful for a lot of people, probably.
I did want to answer Cody's, perhaps, I think it was intended to be rhetorical, but Cody's question of why people why more people read Gravity's Rainbow than Against the Day. I won't go on about this too much because it's not directly relevant, but I think there's two reasons that come to mind. Is the first is that like Gravity's Rainbow has a like head in the sand, like manic energy to the language that either like you really like kind of catch on, like it's like catching a wave or not. Like either you're like when you're surfing, which I've only done like twice in my life anyway, but like, you know, like you either like along for the ride or you get off the ride.
Sure.
Number one. And the language in Against the Day is beautiful. It's great. It's not as propulsive and it's a lot more detached. And just not, I wouldn't describe the language of Against the Day as manic, and I would describe the language of like Gravity's Rainbow to be manic. And the second reason is, I mean, Gravity's Rainbow slaps you in the face with some pretty like kind of sexy conspiracy theories about, you know, like Germany, like the lines between enemy and ally in World War II were a lot more blurred than people want to really admit or explore. And that there's, you know, like the fire in the bulb section kind of slaps you in the face with a pretty fun and relatable conspiracy and stuff. You know, like if you come out of Gravity's Rainbow not grokking that Pynchon is trying to say, like what I basically just said, like about the lines being blurred and stuff, and like I would kind of question if you really read the book, I mean, at all, but just because it's so in your face at times, that argument, and that like it's so in your face thematically, it's so in your face kind of literally. And Against the Day is just a lot more subtle. And also, I mean, World War One just doesn't have the cultural cachet that World War II does.
That's definitely true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that we're sitting here and reading 30 to 50 pages, every couple of weeks. And so we're getting a ton of detail out of this book. And, you know, Cody, when you read this book, it was a revelation for you, and you've dug into it multiple times. And so you've been able to pull out that kind of thematic density and stuff.
That's also fair, yeah.
Like Gravity's Rainbow is like a propaganda work. Like more than anything else, it is trying to change how the reader thinks. Even if you don't jive with it, even if you don't agree with it by the end, you have to think the way it thinks, or else you're not gonna get anything out of it. Not even mild escapist enjoyment. But Against the Day, if you're not tuned in from the start, I think it's really easy for it to go over your head if you're not just like the kind of manic and analyzer that like the four of us kind of are, at least by dint of doing the podcast.
Yeah, couldn't have said that better myself, you guys. I think you're right about some of the reasons why people are reading it.
Plus, it's just not as sexy.
That's true.
Which is what I was really afraid you were going to say, Luke. Just the way you had said the word sexy. I thought that was at the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
Eventually, the ship does make its way for Morocco, and Kit is finding it pretty impossible to get out of the lower decks of the ship. That the ship itself has sort of changed fundamentally to where even if he wanted to go back up decks, like the ship he thinks he's going back to is just not going to be there. And so he finds himself sort of trapped down in the hold of the ship, and he starts just kind of helping out where he can because he has nothing else to do. And he sort of has a burgeoning relationship building with OIC. And eventually we get to that point on 520 where, again, the port of call is changed from Tangier to Agadir. And at this point, he goes a little bit deeper into the ship and he finds the aforementioned German colonists. Does someone want to read the quote starting with Kit discovered the reason for this on 520?
Kit discovered the reason for this when he noticed a stack of used plates and dishes from the first-class dining salon outside one of the empty coal bunkers. Curious, he stuck his head in and to his surprise discovered a group of hidden people who'd been living here all along and most of whom spoke German. It seemed they were destined for plantation on the Atlantic coast of Morocco as colonists whose presence there would then justify German interest in the area. For reasons of diplomacy, they were being kept sequestered down here in the engine spaces and known only to the captain, among whose orders had been encrypted a couple clauses concerning their disposition as shadow colonials on call. Homesteading through the area was not promising for husbandry, The coast being as much at the mercy of the wind as its hinterland was at that of the tribesmen of Sus, who did not take kindly to Europeans in their midst. The coast was in fact closed to all foreign trade by edict of the young Sultan Abdelaziz, despite France, Spain, and England having made a deal allowing France the right of peaceful penetration elsewhere in Morocco.
Yeah, so essentially as good of a description of what was really going on there as Pynchon can put without just being like, here is a real thing from history. On this day, this it's very accurate if you do the actual research. And so eventually Kit figures out that he can escape from the Stupendica. And so he makes his way out of the Stupendica, and it says here on 521, the rest of the evening passed in a fog. Kit remembered getting into a discussion of the two Stupendica problem with Moises, a resident Jewish mystic. Not unusual for these parts, actually. Jonah's the classic case. Recall that he was traveling to Tarshish, whose port, 500 miles north of here, we call Cadiz today, one of whose alternative names is Agadir. Tradition in this Agadir is that Jonah came ashore just to the south of here at Massa. There is a mosque commemorating the event. So again, we have a continuation of this bifurcation and this bilocation of multiple things, or of there being multiple versions of something. And this brings us to kind of as the Pynchon Wiki points out, a sort of reference to Moby Dick in a way with the sermon about Jonah that happens pretty early in that book. Will, you had already mentioned kind of some of the allusions to Moby Dick in this chapter. Do you have anything you want to add in that realm?
Well, I guess I would actually mention slightly less. I mean, that sermon is like, honestly, that's one of those parts of that book that I can't help but feel like no matter how much time I read and reread it, I'm not going to fully digest it. It's like Melville, if you buy into that kind of thing, Melville was channeling something there. Like he was really getting at something. But that part of the book, from what I recall, is broadly, it's talking about destination as just kind of an idea, what it is to get onto a boat with the goal, in the case of Moby Dick, the goal to commit bloodshed and return home, that you're not going anywhere. And it's kind of an inversion of the Jonah story of how by being whalers, you are submitting to God in this true way, because you're in the exact opposite of what Jonah's doing. You're going out looking for whales, pulling them out of the sea and pulling them back home, so that the light of God, literally in this case because of lamp oil, can shine upon your loved ones. And there's a lot more to it than that. So if I'm missing anything you were thinking of, feel free to mention it. But I was kind of honestly brought along more to the later section, that weird bit that people just kind of forget about in Moby Dick, that takes place like 20 years later, and it's actually kind of framed as, oh, this is where the conversation for most of the story is happening. Or not, sorry, this is a conversation that's setting most of the storytelling of Moby Dick, in a way of him telling most of these stories at a different time in, I think it said, the Congo. But there's a lot of discussion there about like kind of duality of location again, like in a more direct way. There's a lot of like discussion in that chapter, and I can't remember any details, sorry, but it's a lot about how we have these names that we reuse across the planet that mean these same things for all of us, and yet they are not the same place. And it's just kind of musing with that, getting at the whole narrative structure of Moby Dick, because that book is that.
Yeah, that's all great stuff, Will.
I have two things to say about stuff on 521.
Okay.
The first one, I really love the paragraph that starts with, at least the beginning of the paragraph that starts with, and as if reincarnated from some intermediate or bardo state. And then that's like a metaphor for Kit leaving the ship. I mean, I won't talk about this for too long, but I've been on ships for a prolonged period of time twice in my life. One was just a cruise on the Nile, which was not like, there's not like heavy waves or anything on all
Was
that
there a
stuff.
murder?
Not that I recall. I do think there was something about like somebody like disappeared, but it turns out like they quit because they're like somebody's guide or something. So there was some like mystery about that, but then it turned out he just like jumped, like he didn't jump overboard literally, but like whenever we stopped at some point, he just fucked off, I guess. I didn't tell anyone. Um, which is neither here nor there perhaps, but I do like that question. Anyway, the other time was I took like I think it was a 12-day voyage with my grandmother whenever I was 18 and I turned 19 on the boat. Voyage from Ushuaia, Argentina to Antarctica. And, doing that, you have to cross Drake's Passage. And like about a month before we went, like a ship hit an iceberg and everyone had to get into lifeboats. And I think everyone survived, but they had to be in lifeboats in Drake's Passage. And I don't know if I don't know if any of y'all, my co-hosts, or any of our listeners, like know about the realities of being in a lifeboat in a heavy storm. But it's like broken bones, and you're going to be, like all the consequences of nausea and all that stuff. Anyway, but on the way to Antarctica, I think I took Dramamine, and I had like those wristband things that like apply pressure to your wrist, and like that helped and stuff. But I was struggling on the way to Antarctica, and I overheard a crewmate being like, "Oh yeah, this is like such a easy voyage. Like these people don't know how easy that they have it," and I had been struggling. And on the way home, apparently, so a Force 10 storm is a hurricane, and we went through a storm that was a Force 9 on my birthday. And, the returning to Ushuaia after, like, people broke bones, like, passengers broke bones just, like, going around the ship to try to, like, get to, I don't think everyone had like their own bathroom, and people were trying to get meals. I think people were trying to take pictures and videos of the storm. People did, there were injuries and stuff. But getting back to Ushuaia, and anyone who's been on a boat for a prolonged period of time knows some semblance of this is like whenever you get back on land, it does feel like you're like, I don't know. So it can be a really refreshing, and I mean, like here it's likened to rebirth. It can be a very memorable and relieving experience. So I do like that metaphor that he does, the pension includes. And then on the subject of what is it Moises or Moses? Anyway, whatever he says, I do like that he seems to not like I remember that this is I think if my parents even listen to this episode, they'll be kind of surprised that I remember this, but I do think I heard a sermon whenever I was like 10 about this subject. That I believe the subject of the sermon was like the Jewish and Christian version was like superior or like more historically accurate than the Islamic version, which I think is what's being talked about here, is that there's two different versions of the story. And this preacher who, in I have since like heard him do sermons that were like a lot more like accepting of other religions and stuff. This was, I think, the late 90s, so it was pre 9/11. I don't remember it being like particularly anti-Islamic. I think it was more just being like, Christianity's better, basically, or more accurate. Anyway, I mean but I do like that Moises, he's a mystic, so he's like, I like that it seems realistic to me that a mystic of basically any religion would not want to be like, oh, like the Jewish version of the Jonah story is better. He presents them as like equal, if that makes sense. And I feel like it's a very like non-mainstream religion type idea to have, or you know what I'm saying? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's like, mystics are generally, like they have their own opinions on things, and they're not, I don't find, like of the mystical religious texts that I've read, they're not, it's a lot about just like how great God is, all this stuff. It's not about like, it's not about like in-group, out-group stuff. It's not about rules, I don't know.
So that leads Kit to living in Morocco for a brief period, specifically in the area of Agadir, where he joins a fishing boat. And he goes on a voyage with the fishermen where they catch a tremendously like preposterous amount of fish, so much so that it's like spilling out of their pockets when they eventually make their way back onto land. Do we have any thoughts on the fishing expedition? I wanted to hold space there in case anyone had a theory as far as what that was about.
No, I just thought it was a fun little side story, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it you know, the Jonah stuff is right there, and it feels
Yeah.
like you're supposed to pull that out of there.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is where Kit's supposed to be, I guess, if I'm reading it that way. Like this is God's blessings being heaped upon the fishermen who took him in, right? I guess.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I mean, it's just kind of it is just kind of fun. It is.
Mhm.
I do like the idea of being the kind of guy that Kit is. That is to say, never having set foot on a boat before, and the first time not the first time, but one of the first times he's on a fishing vessel, he's just almost drowning in sardines.
He does have an association with water. His sort of like vector math awakening, if I remember correctly, was caused by him witnessing a waterfall.
Yeah, definitely. It was at least the awakening we got to see. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's him being where he's supposed to be and sort of Hashem giving some sort of blessing to the fishermen for that hospitality. I think it's also interesting that you had mentioned kind of when we had talked about why Kit acts like he's in too dangerous of a spot to date Dally, that he's sort of stuck in this context of his sort of being caught up in the machine, so to speak, that complex half of things, that power half of things, as opposed to kind of the civilization half of things. And this, I mean, if this is where he's meant to be, it's the exact opposite. He's off the boat, he's off of the warship, and now he's just fishing with some regular folks in Morocco. There's probably no way that Vibe's gonna find him there if he was to stick around forever.
Yeah, almost in like a very silly and unnecessary way. It's a little bit like if you compare this chapter to the last one with Kit kind of having his crisis of, I mean, reality. You get kind of like a goofy version of that old joke about the businessman and the fisherman the businessman goes down to the dock, goes fishing, talks to a fisherman who says, all I do every day is I fish for 6 hours a day. And he said, well, if you fish a little more, you could get a bigger boat, and then you would be able to stay home all day. And he said, well, but I only have to fish 4 hours a day right now.
Yeah.
And you're out here anyway, aren't you? But like it is just kind of a weird like thematic remixing of that silly joke, which is kind of weird but cool.
Good point. And so then the chapter closes out with Dally having sort of a vision of her own of Kit and sort of being able to almost astral project towards him. And then on the other side, Kit leaves Morocco and he lands in Trieste. And that brings us to the end of the chapter. Did we have any last thoughts on 37 that we wanted to talk about before we close up?
No, I think I mean, as far as I know, we covered about everything we could pretty thoroughly. I don't know. I know we harped on 36 a lot. I don't want to. I don't know. I don't want to outright, dismiss it as like the worst. I was thinking about this more and more as we were going through 37. Like 36, it's not good, but it's also I'm trying to find some like redeeming factor to it. Like I feel like there has to be some reason. There has to be something that would keep that chapter in this book from an author who's at this point in his career as good as he is. And I just can't wrap my head around the need for it, So I don't know. It's just one of those like that's been in the back of my mind this entire time.
I do. I mean, I remember when I was reading the chapter, it occurred to me that it wouldn't surprise me if Pynchon had been to Cambridge. That's where it's at, right? Cambridge. If you've been to Cambridge and maybe done a campus tour or like something like that, or like I don't know, where it's like I'm not saying it's like in terms of like the setting, it seemed there were details to me that could come through in pictures or paintings, but pictures probably at this point and stuff where he could have just done some research online or done some research in books. But I think it's possible. And if he did actually go to Cambridge and do some research, I mean, he was probably just looking for some excuse to. I mean, if that's true, I would think that he would therefore have to kind of feel the need, wrongly perhaps, as we've talked about, but he would feel the need to include something about to justify that research in the book, I guess. That's a bit of a conspiracy corner, I guess.
Roll the stinger one more time.
Электромузыкальный инструмент терминвокс – это первый инструмент такого типа.
It's like I'm kind of like, I have no proof for this, but it occurred to me that it's possible. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to look. I'm willing to give the man too much rope sometimes. But I mean, I can't really come up with any great explanation other than the fact that it does a lot of the mechanical work of moving the plot forward in not an efficient way, but in a way that it like if you're willing to like squint and like try and read the particular human dynamics as deeply ironic and deeply rooted in like some kind of context that we have no fucking logic for, but if we're just like completely out of the loop on what's going on in this chapter, I would believe it. That would make sense, but we don't have a reason to believe that other than just wishful thinking, I guess. And so it's just kind of like a weird artifact. I don't know, is how I see it. Like it's a lot of Pynchon goofiness. It's a lot of cultural commentary on the kind of stuff Pynchon likes to comment on. It's tying threads together so that you get from one place to the next. It's doing the stuff that people complain about him doing all the time. Like, yeah, Kate, you were talking about how suddenly you don't have Lou there, you don't have the Neville and Nigel there. Well, yeah, but like think about Gravity's Rainbow, think about even Vineland. You might open a chapter and you're in a completely different context for the first 10 pages, right? This is him doing what people have been wanting him to do in terms of like making clear the transitions between different things. It just doesn't work for us, clearly.
Yeah.
Like I can laugh at some of the comedy, but it's because I'm really putting myself in the mindset of like watching a Buster Keaton movie or something, which is not a bad mindset. It's just not reading a Pynchon book. Buster Keaton's not a good pull there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Some screwball comedy from like
Yeah.
Cary Grant, His Girl Friday.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Great. Yeah.
All right. Well, did we miss any funny parts that we wanted to talk about?
Well, I'm gonna do something that I will probably regret and read out loud the Pinky lines.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
I've got the accent, I think.
I love when Will does an accent.
Yes.
It happens once a year, and I look forward to it every year.
It's always a good time.
Hopefully I don't let you down here, but yeah, so on page 493. Meanwhile, I say, girls, look, it's Pinky. Hello, Pinky. See here, we're off to an alfresco in Honeysuckle Walk. Won't you join us? Yes, do, Pinky. Tell us, Pinky, are you a nice mathematician or a naughty one?
That's really good.
Like, it is that.
Yeah.
And it's just fucking mind melting.
It's
crazy. Like, that's what I mean. Imagining being Yashmin in this context, my brain is just horribly shriveled.
That was very impressive. Well done.
Thank you.
Any other funny moments?
I'm blanking on exactly when he's funny, but I do think that what's Kit's friend's name
Root?
on the ship?
Yeah.
I feel like he has some funny qualities where like isn't he like really drunk all the time? But like you can't really tell or
It's
something.
one of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like what is four-dimensional geometry? It sounds like nonsense to me, but I don't know shit about that. So
Do you want an explanation?
This could take a while.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if I would. I mean, I don't know if I would understand even half of what you would say. So
Have you ever read A Wrinkle in Time?
I actually do think I did, but I think I was like in middle school.
Yeah, I mean that's what it's the whole like shadow of a square, or shadow of a cube is a square thing.
Yeah.
But you do that with a three-dimensional object, and it so like you go from a point to a circle. It has two. It goes from 1 to 2 dimensions. It has this number of angles, interior angles, and it has this surface area relative to this area. And you have a similar thing going from a hypothetical one-dimensional square to a square, and the same thing going from a line to a square. Blah blah blah. But then once you bring that to 3 dimensions, you start to see funky things happen. Like it's not just the dot goes from a line, goes to a line, goes to a square. It's now the square is now the square now has 6 faces instead of like an even duplication of things. And so what happens with the math as you continue that pattern of like unfolding the next dimension from the previous dimensions? And that's generally, I think, especially at this point in time, I think that's what was happening in abstract geometry circles, at least this side of things.
Nice. Another funny part is what?
I'm sure that helped.
Yeah. Another funny part I did just realize is, I mean, the Zombini kids, from kids' perspective, come walking into the I think it's like the dining area, or maybe it's a bar or something, on the ship, like doing magic tricks, and it's implied that kid immediately looks at the waitstaff to see the reaction. And I do think that if I was on a ship and all these kids start coming in like juggling silverware or like whatever they're doing, I would probably look to the waitstaff to see what their reaction was. But it's just kind of absurd and funny. I mean, and I would probably end up smiling and laughing if I realized that they like were actually professional magicians. You know what I'm saying? It would be funny to me, I think. It's mostly because they're children. I think if adults were doing it, they would be a little bit more like, hey, maybe don't show off so much.
Mhm.
But because it's kids, I think there's an absurdity to it that I like and find comedic.
I think that the funniest moment is Cody's Community reference. That caught me so off guard. What about quotes? Who's got a quote they want to throw out there?
I've got mine right here. It is on 506.
Oh, I'm safe.
Well, I was going back and forth between that and 511, starting at the page break, but I'm going 506. You could smell crude oil in the air. The first wheel folk of summer in bright sweaters and caps and striped socks went wearing gaily in battalion strength along the great viaduct on tandem bicycles, which seemed to be a city craze that year. Bicycle bells going nonstop, the massed choruses of them in all sorts of ragged harmonies, loud as church bells on Sunday, though maybe with a finer texture. Roughnecks went in and out of saloon doors and sometimes windows. Elms cast deep shade over yards and streets, forests of elms back when they were still elms in Cleveland, making visible the flow of the breezes, iron railings surrounding the villas of the well-off, roadside ditches full of white clover, a sunset that began early and stayed late, growing to a splendor that had her and Merle gazing at it in disbelief and then at each other. Just lovely scene setting. Nothing really more than that. And one of the finer points of chapter 36. And yeah, just a nice little piece of writing.
My quote comes from 515. I apologize. It's a long one. I'm sure most of you have heard my voice enough this time. Daydreaming. There are many, perhaps most of us, for whom an ocean voyage, particularly on a first-class ticket, figures high on the list of human delights. Kit, however, landlocked all his life, still arriving at New Haven and beholding the marvels of Long Island Sound, did not happen to share that regard for the aquatic. The enclosure, the repetition of daily faces, small annoyances anywhere else, here intensified by the unavailability of dry land, achieved with little effort the feeling of malevolence, conspiracy, pursuit. Farther out into the ocean they steamed, the more the horizon asserted itself, the less able or come to that willing was Kit to resist accepting the irreversible theft from his life. The great simple fact of Webb's absence. He lapsed into silence, torpor, for scaleless moments seized by memories of desert plateau, mountain peaks, meadows full of Indian paintbrush and wild primrose, some unexpected river 2 steps off the trail, then released back into his 20-knot push into the uncreated. He was not sure what it was he felt. If anyone had said desperation, he'd have shrugged and rolled a cigarette, shaking his hand. Not it. Not it exactly. I really love that. And I went on to then highlight the next paragraph and the paragraph after that and down through to the page break. There is just like so much excellent writing in this chapter, especially in contrast to the previous chapter. But this description of like a character who we have had less time with, especially less time with the interiority of with. You know, we've gotten a fair amount of Frank. Even Lake at this point has had more kind of, I think, time dedicated to their mental state than Kit, and part of that is because Kit has been, pretty much a child for most of the book and ferried about by the whims of other people. But here he is again, a little bit older, a little bit wiser for having dealt with the kind of situation that he's been stuck in at Yale for a while now, and we get that access to his mind. And the one thing that he feels like he's really missing is his father. And it's just a really, really beautifully written segment of the book. And there are parts of me that can relate to him in that way.
I suppose I'll go next. I'm gonna go with the paragraph that starts on the end of 520. Town dwellers, Susi tradesfolk, Berbers from up the valley, merchants in with caravans from the mountains and the desert beyond left off the minutiae of the day's business to stand along the beach and gaze, uncertain of their peril. Few here had ever seen a vessel bigger than a fishing boat, except for passing shapes farther out to sea, unreadable as to size. Tree-climbing goats up in the branches of argan trees paused in their browsing after the olive-like fruit to regard the metal visitation. Gnawa musicians invoked the Mluk Gnawi, calling upon the doorkeeper of the Seigneurs Noirs to open the door of good and evil. Everyone agreed that the ship must have come from someplace very far away. To suppose it had originated with one of the great powers did little to clarify the question, as the phrase, here on this isolated coast, must embrace possibilities beyond secular geography. And that one, I don't know, it's just good scene setting, it's a simple one. There's a lot of density in these chapters, and I like it when he takes the time to give us a scene to picture, even if I'm not someone who generally loves, visual description. But it's really nice here.
Lucas.
Yeah. My quote is the beginning of the paragraph following Kate's quote. So, nor as it turned out was SS Stupendica all she seemed. She had another name, a secret name, which would be made known to the world at the proper hour, a secret identity, latent in her present conformation, though invisible to the average passenger. And then he goes on about World War One, basically. But I don't know. There is an aspect of that. There's an aspect of, I mean, he was in the Navy, so I assume he likes being on boats. There's the part of the paragraph that you read, Kate, that is, there are many, perhaps most of us, from an ocean voyage, particularly on a first-class ticket, figures high on the list of human delights. I mean, I would assume that Pynchon counts himself among that number. And, I mean, even if my prior conspiracy corner theory is not true, I do think we can all assume that, like Pynchon, I don't know, it's somewhat likely that him and his wife and their son, or just Pynchon or whoever. I don't know. I mean, I feel like that he's taken a boat from New York City to Europe. I don't know. I mean, those voyages happen still, like with passengers. My dad did that semi recently with my stepmom. I mean, and I do think it's just kind of funny to me to kind of picture like Pynchon being on a boat and like all of these like zany, interesting, somewhat crazy ideas occurring to him as he's just, like nobody knows who he is, so he's not going to be recognized and stuff. He's just another dude on this boat, but I assume, and like if he's actually taken a voyage like this, I assume, he's probably done some writing or gained ideas from being on the boat. But it's just kind of funny to me to picture him walk around on a boat thinking all these crazy ideas.
All right, so that brings us to the most pinch-on part of the chapter. I think that for me, the most pinch-on part of the chapter has to be the thing that spun me off into my whole monologue earlier, just because it feels like kind of like what you said in your response to it, Cody, of just like that is what Pynchon is hoping his readers do, if I may be so bold, that he is trying to inspire us to kind of do our own research into these things that he is referencing and have a response to it, both in the context of the book and in the broader point that he's trying to make with the stuff that he's choosing to write. So for me, it has to be that. And maybe that isn't necessarily the most Pynchon part of the book in terms of what he's writing about, but it is the most Pynchon part of the chapter in terms of my experience with it.
No, I would agree. I think you're spot on. I will say, just to pick something different, I will say that the ship, basically two ships becoming one ship, is very much in line with him and with this book in general. The idea of duality or bifurcation or the splitting, but in this case, it's kind of going the opposite way, where you have two things coming into one thing instead of one thing becoming two things. But that, I think, very much kind of epitomizes what this book and Pynchon's work in general is very good at, is that taking that running theme and inserting these moments of it into the story in a way that doesn't feel ham-fisted and still serves the story and kind of works towards building up whatever it is he's getting at.
That was going to be mine, and I will put my own spin on it rather than picking something else. I do find it interesting that he applies the theme of bilocation to a ship. I feel like bilocation, if it's not part of the denotation of bilocation, that it's a human being and or something living that's bilocating, it's at least part of the connotation that it's something living and or specifically a human being who's bilocating. And applying that to a ship is just really interesting to me because, a ship is not literally a person. I mean, there's all types of stuff with humans and various types of transportation and applying, like human characteristics to our non-sentient, for now at least, modes of transportation that I just find Pynchonian. And just as a concept, like as Cody said, it's just very Pynchonian to do stuff like that, to include stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was considering going with something lame like that, like the boat reality into and
Damn,
becomes
Shots
symbolic of
fired.
everything. But nah, I'm just gonna go with the fact that Moises is like stoned out of his mind and pretends to not know what hashish is because that's just, if you are in Morocco and you don't know what you're doing, that's the reaction you'll get by everyone, including people whose eyes look like cherries. It's been openly allowed but illegal for so long that just no one admits to it, but it's very common still. It's kind of hilarious.
Well, like a lot of Europe's marijuana is grown and then smuggled into Europe from Morocco. I mean, I think that's how the Silk Road guy made his initial fortune, I think.
Yeah, well, I think Yeah, it's either that or Albania for most European cannabis, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, see, I mean, same difference, same place.
Oh
That'll
yeah.
make someone mad.
Probably an Albanian. I can't imagine a Moroccan. I don't know. Moroccans, whenever I was there,
Mm,
seemed more relaxed.
I don't know.
Albania's in Eastern Europe, right?
I mean, I think Albania proves the point about what we mean when we say Eastern Europe is up to debate.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would honestly wager that most Moroccans would be offended by being compared to Albania.
Yeah, you might be right. You might be right.
Nothing against Albania. I would love to visit there. I have a lot of respect for the stick-to-itiveness of their culture.
Mapping his own live show in Albania.
Yes.
If we have any
Where-
Albanian listeners who want to get going on a venue for that.
We can do a European tour starting with the Faroe Islands, you know?
Yes.
There you
We
go.
might not leave that area.
We're going to be put to work counting sheep.
Yes.
This is deep lore from the podcast.
Real throwback.
Oh man, we do not have any correspondence from any listeners this week, but you may have noticed during our conspiracy corner segments that we do have a bumper for that now. That was graciously made for us by just a listener, so thank you to them. They had talked to you, Luke. Do you want to kind of give them a shout out?
So yeah, the person who made the bumper, I guess is what it's called, is Nick. I don't know why in the group chat I kept on calling him a different name, or them a different name. I don't know what pronouns they use. But yeah, their name is Nick. They apparently have a. Let me look. They have this piece of audio fiction called Salmon's Run that they initially described as basically Doctor Strangelove meets that theme song you now have for Conspiracy Corner. So it is apparently similar to our Conspiracy Corner music now. But I'll read a little bit more what they said. So they said that Salmon's Run is somewhere between a fiction podcast and a piece of music. The story follows a young man who accidentally causes an explosion in Lower Manhattan and must run for his life when everyone thinks he's a terrorist. The format is highly music oriented. My wife says it's like Baz Luhrmann in that the piece has its own fully executed maximalist aesthetic. That's about as good a description as any. They have apparently that project has been successful enough to kind of lead to some other cool stuff that they then went on about, which sounded cool as well. Just like I think like magazine writing and different stuff. Anyway, but yeah, to thank them, we wanted to include a mention of that and an encouragement to our listeners to check that out as a way to thank them for our great new Conspiracy Corner music, which we didn't. There's no money exchanged hands, so yeah.
And I will leave a link to that show in the show notes.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this episode. For our next episode, we're going to be covering chapters 38 and 39, continuing on with the general pace that we have been working at. If you happen to be a reader with a different pagination, the line that you're going to be reading to is not in the document.
Oh, sorry, that's my fault.
That's okay.
It ends at the last line is I was hoping you could find a way. Ominous.
Indeed. If you like what you're doing, I hope you all like what you're doing. If you happen to also like what we're doing and want to support the show, if you think our show is worth $1, we would love to have that dollar. Please consider making a donation on Ko-Fi. Any funds we receive will be used to upgrade equipment, pay hosting fees, and help make the show better. We did offer some of that Ko-Fi scratch to the generous creator of our new bumper, but they wanted to turn that down. So we have a very magnanimous group of folks who listen to our show, and thank you again for creating that. It's a very lovely and I would say fitting piece of audio
Yes.
for us to use.
Man,
for the
I
type
listened to it like 4 or 5 times when we first got it.
I did too. But we are on Ko-Fi at ko-fi.com/mappingthezone. You can get in touch with us any number of ways. You can email us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at pinchonpod. Maybe. I don't know if anyone's checking that inbox anymore.
Nope.
You can also follow us on Blue Sky. We're there on Blue Sky at Mapping the Zone, and we do have an Instagram page at Mapping the Zone as well. If you are interested in getting in touch with us monetarily and you want something in exchange for that, you can buy shirts or bags, mugs, stickers with our lovely show art provided to us by Brad per second on our spread shop. We're over there at Mapping the Zone. If you want to get in touch with Luke's writing in particular, he has a magazine that he edits, an online journal called Just Keep Up Magazine. If you're interested in reading what I am writing in my own life, you can find me on Substack at Fostering Kate. And until next time, thank you all for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.